welcome to the Demi Taste podcast, where we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but we get to talking about a little bit of everything. I am your host, Demi Taste, or you can call me Doug, and I am joined today by my co-host, Spooky Chicken, also known as Ian. Hi, Ian.
Hello there, Doug. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for doing most of the research for this episode, to be quite honest.
No, don't
It's
worry.
been a
Don't get your hopes too
busy
high up.
week. Yeah. So I think this is going to be a bit of a grab bag of topics today. And by the way, I apologize that we started late. We needed to get ourselves organized, and the dog was running around underfoot, and that didn't make it easier. Not to mention, I had to go check what the actual casking was on an Octomore, which for those of you who know Octomore know that that might sometimes be a hard thing to do with, at least Port Charlotte loves to put these funny cask type codes on their stuff. So, okay. I'm going to have to stop reacting to people's cameras appearing to freeze. So you kind of have to learn how to decode Brookladdy abbreviations. So I had to go to the website to double check. But anyway, hello Genji, hello Pawn. Good to see
Oh, is
y'all.
Genji here? Excellent.
Yeah, we've got the comments tab there. So yeah, that reminds me. It's not a sponsor per se, but we are now using StreamYard as a platform, and we are absolutely loving it. All that stuff that I used to do manually in OBS is just like automatic. You've got like the layouts that make sense. Like we can have a featured layout. We can have our faces sort of different sizes like this or like this, and we have these cards for our names, and we also have like we used this fun overlay when we had Caitlin on. We've got the Demi Taste logo up there in the corner, or I guess I need to point that way. We've got the Whiskey Lodge logo that we can substitute in, which I will do for today, because while this is the Demi Taste podcast, we like to do this segment when we don't have a guest that we've been calling the Whiskey Lodge cast, where people from the Whiskey Lodge get together and talk about stuff that is of interest to whiskey enthusiasts, like the type that you would find in the Whiskey Lodge. So another cool thing that StreamYard lets us do is we actually get to simultaneously stream to Twitch and YouTube, which is very cool because Twitch is sort of where we grew up. It was the easiest thing to get started with. It also has fun tools for editing the stream and doing highlights and so on after the fact. But YouTube, we think, may be more our target audience, and it also is the place where we like to archive our videos. Especially since we do a lot of raw video uploads directly there. When we stream live to YouTube, we get to just leave those in the live tab. So we don't have to confuse our edited videos with our non-edited content. And I think that that's just going to be a better experience for everyone on the YouTube channel. So if you find yourself interested in making a podcast of your own or any other sort of thing like this, actually also works great as a video call platform. Much better than what we were using before, Discord, which seems to care less about if your video and audio get desynced. So this is a really nice way to have people on as guests, because all we have to do is send them a link and let them join in the call. And it feels professional and easy. And if you're interested in doing that, there's going to be an affiliate link in the description of the video. So if you do that, we're going to get some kind of kickback. I don't really know how that works. It's essentially my first affiliate link. So if you do happen to do that, let me know. I'd be curious to know. And I'd be curious to know what you think of it. In my personal case, when I showed up on Embellish Podcast and he was using StreamYard, before we even went live, I was completely sold on just how much more professional it felt compared to the silly combination of Discord and OBS that we were using before, or even the sort of Zoom call type thing that I think a lot of other podcasts kind of try to do. This is just a purpose-built platform for it, and it works really well. So enough advertising out of the way. Oh, thanks, Genji. Yeah, I've heard feedback from other people that this feels a lot more natural for us also, because now I can focus my hosting slash producing, right? Being an interviewer and a producer at the same time is hard enough. When you're fighting against OBS, it is really distracting. So I've been told that it seems like this stream goes a lot more naturally for everybody when we are not using OBS. So Yeah, there's just sort of endless benefits. Also, it stores your video for depending on the tier that you get. It stores the video streams of the video recordings of your streams for a certain length of time. I think it's 50 hours of total recorded content. So it depends on how fast, in my case. So it depends on how fast your content is getting produced. I guess we do a couple hours a week, so that's going to last a good long time for us. And we might talk more about
Um,
that as we get better at using it. But let's get into like actually talking about whiskey stuff.
Indeed, we've got a lot of little things happening today. I think we're going to start off the hour by talking about a couple of upcoming and just out releases. I believe ahead of the holiday season right here. Most notably, and Demi, you have access to all of these articles. Fry, according to, and now this is from an article from Forbes, I could not really find much else out about it from Fry Ranch, but Fry Ranch is releasing a line of smoked grain series, starting with an American single malt, 55% alcohol, I believe, and valued at about $60 for 375 milliliter bottles. Now, I've tried a couple of Fry Ranch before, and I'm actually quite a big fan of their ryes, as it were. They're usually pushing the boundaries of how high I like my spirits, quite honestly, how high in alcohol I like my spirits. 55 is a nice, reasonable point for me to be sitting at, though, for cask strength whiskey. Let me see. So this is just kind of a new, one of the most recent additions to the American single malt family. There's a lot of people getting in on it. In the time that we were gone, I was just looking at a bunch of other ones. I believe I did not get to manage to taste it, but Jack Daniel's single malt and Jim Beam's single malt, Claremont Steep, I was looking into. I tried Jim Beam's and it was something. But
Oh, you got
so
to
that,
try it? I am
oh yeah,
envious. I think
don't
it
be.
goes without saying that. Oh, really? Okay. Well, that's disappointing. Goes without
I
saying though that we're fans of Beam on this show.
I like Beam. Beam is amazing. Producer of whiskey. They're an extremely large producer of whiskey, and they make some good stuff. I think that their attempt at Claremont Steep was at best a little bit too. It had a strange sort of sour mash character to it, I would call it. I believe it has to do with the type of yeast that they used, especially. I don't think that it fit the profile of what I have previously liked out of American single malt whiskeys. My biggest thing with it is it had this very, very distinct fish note to it. Like a little bit of tuna, a little bit of shrimp, or something like that.
Huh.
So that one is it was a very interesting one, but I think that is these producers' first attempt at a single malt whiskey. So I think it'll be good to kind of keep an eye out to see what they do. But I was not entirely blown away by their Claremont Steep release. I'll be honest with you, in a variety of ways.
Kind of still want to try it, and I
Oh,
would
no, no, no!
I
I
would
highly
love
suggest trying it.
I would love to interview someone from Beam because I mean like that just feels like a pipe dream, right? Like we are small enough that I don't know that anyone from Beam would actually care. But it is a very it's a very pertinent topic seeing the larger producers like Jack and Beam getting in on American single malt even before it's uh even before that regulation actually passes, right? It's been proposed, which I think we kind of started seeing these things come out when there was talk of the proposal or after the proposal. But it's not been approved yet. We're still waiting. I'm very close to feeling like I need to do another American single malt advent. I'm sort of in the planning stages of that. I think I might do it ahead of time because I have other plans for December. So I might do like a pre-advent on American single malt.
Oh,
um,
okay, that's quite fun.
I guess I'm a day late already if I wanted to do it in November, but you know what I mean. Just the idea of like regularly putting out American single malt reviews again. But yeah, that I really do want to reach out to Beam and see if I can talk to somebody because it would be really cool to get a perspective on their thoughts on, how it should be produced, how it fits into the portfolio, how similar or different it is from what they already do in terms of bourbon. I don't think Beam has a rye, does it?
Do
They
they
must.
not? They must, right?
I'm just not calling to mind a rye at the moment.
They have a rye bourbon. They have a rye whiskey. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
they have
what
a
what
rye whiskey. They call it their pre-prohibition style.
what brand is that under? Is it a Beam?
Jim Beam, apparently.
Okay. This is one of
Yeah,
those situations where I kind of wish we had Phil around because he's got the encyclopedic knowledge of Beam that I do not have.
that is very fair. Yeah. Um, yeah, that might actually be their only rye that I am aware of in their general lineup. I'm trawling through it really quickly right here, and that looks to be the only one. Now, I mean, that isn't to account for all the rest of the brands under what is the overall company, Centauri Beam, if I remember rightly.
Beam Suntory,
Of
but
Beam Centauri, yeah, of which there are a lot. So take that all as you will. But yeah, no, Beam hasn't really done that much rye, I want to say.
all right. So we talked
Um,
about the Fry Ranch smoked grain series there that I displayed for a moment. Um,
Indeed.
so
The
we're
next,
just talking new releases, not necessarily this was a super interesting thing, right?
right? Yeah. The next one is this is just ones that I found that somewhat interested me. The next one I think is going to interest you a little bit as well. It is the Westward Milestone whiskey, created to celebrate, I believe, their 20th anniversary in 2024. It's set to release officially on November 8th, but they did have a pre-sale, I believe, earlier this year. The interesting thing about the Milestone whiskey is that it uses what they call a 21 barrel Solera system, which can mean some interesting things. Doug, what do you know about Soleras?
Uh, boy, I'm gonna butcher this, but let me give it a shot. So a Solera is basically as I understand it, a tiered aging system where you will put, new make whatever. Usually, I think I first heard about Solera in the context of sherry. And the way that they age sherry is sort of tiers in the warehouse where they will put the new wine into a set of barrels, and then and they will bottle wine from the fully aged barrels, and then they will but not completely empty them, and then progressively move a portion of the tier prior to the one that was released into the set of barrels that was just partially emptied, and then sort of move everything down partially. So what you have is a over time a mix that includes the oldest liquid and liquid no younger than the length of time the previous tier had aged. Do I have that
Yeah,
about
that's
right?
a that's a pretty good explanation of it. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's all. That's hitting everything that we needed to hit right now. Interesting thing about Solera aging. So it is traditionally used in sherry. That is where you'll see most of it. Pedro Jimenez sherry, most notably, has a very robust Solera aging system. It has also been historically used for things like other wines, beer, vinegar, and brandy, if I remember rightly. Now, it has become more popular for people to say that they are aging Solera for things like rums in the past. Um, decade and a half or thereabouts, I want to say. Ron Zacapa, if memory serves, says that they have a Solera aging system. Interesting thing about Solera aging systems is, like you were talking about, those barrels are getting reused a lot. We are not necessarily talking about if you want a higher resolution one. I believe that did I send you the one on their website might also be a better look at it. The most recent link in the Discord right there. But
Gotcha.
so the interesting thing about Solera aging systems is that by the end of this, you are not always getting out a massive amount of oak flavor from these aging systems. I mean, when we're talking about it, I believe over in Del Bac, we have two barrels that came over from Pedro Jimenez barrels that came over from Frontera de Jerez in Spain that were between 100 and 120 years old. They were in use for that long for the sherry aging process. So when whiskey, when rum and things like that talk about Solera, they're not always talking about it in the same way that we might think of it. I think that Westward, from what it sounds like, is doing something much closer to the more classical conception of the Solera aging process, as they describe it on their website. They have a 21 barrel Solera system that includes some of their, and I quote, most distinctive expressions. They've been apparently working on this for several years, and they're planning for it to be a sort of changing release. Every one of these releases is going to be a bit different, as it were. So that's a good sign for what they're doing. It sounds like they're really trying to kind of get the idea of this Solera into a whiskey, which is not something I've seen quite in the same way before. So it'll be very interesting. I believe this one is going to start retailing. It's going to come out on November 8th. It is going to start retailing, I believe, for a hefty $250. So we'll have to see about that one right there.
Interesting.
Indeed.
Why do you say that it hasn't been in whiskey quite this way before?
Well, so generally when we're talking about Solera aging and things like that, we're talking about a very, very long period of time. I mean, when we're talking about wine, sherry and wine and such, we're talking about decades. I have not seen a Solera aging that did not sound like it was anything more than just a blend of several different barrel aging processes. I believe that this has been more so a thing in rum in the past years. I believe that, what was it, Ron Zaccapa's 21. Their claim, I believe, is that the highest, the oldest barrel in that blend was 21 years old. Not that their Solera aging process had been going on for 21 years or something like that. Whether or not this is exactly going to be that much closer to the original Solera aging process, I'm not quite sure, but it sounds like they're trying to get it closer, which is why I say that. But that is more so speculation than anything else, I would say.
Sort of on that longer end is what you mean, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm interested to see, because if they're planning on doing this for years and years, then I think that they'll have an actual proper Solera aging process going. But it's a really hard thing to get started. You need to wait a long, long time to match some of these sherries and vinegars and things like that that have been doing it for decades, centuries in some cases. So yeah.
Yeah, as we do love to talk about things other than whiskey, my understanding is that true balsamic vinegar is also aged in something like this way.
I do believe so. Yeah, that's why it's very, very hard to get your hands on. There is
Yep.
not much left. One of the big things about the Solera aging process is not just the barrel aging of it, not like how it would be for whiskey exactly. It is much, much less about the oak influence, the wood influence, much, much more about the interaction with the air, with the oxygen, with the evaporation, especially. That's where you get these incredibly syrupy, thick vinegars and the Pedro Jimenez. You could pour either one of those over top of ice cream and they wouldn't honestly be very out of place, as it were.
Yeah, a good balsamic on ice cream is
Very good.
definitely something. Yeah. And just a pro tip for anyone who's about to go out and buy some balsamic vinegar, which can be quite excellent. If you find yourself holding a bottle of balsamic vinegar that is like a large bottle, like a whole bottle of olive oil would be, like a 750 milliliter or something like that, and it's in any way cheap to your mind, that is probably not real balsamic vinegar.
It's only real balsamic vinegar if you pick up a very small bottle and look at it and say, why does this cost so much?
Yeah.
That's the
Absolutely.
real stuff right there.
Yeah. Usually you can find something like that in like an upscale farmer's market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have a really good one. I don't know if it's like a genuine balsamic, but I remember them saying that it was. I think it's Saratoga maybe, but that doesn't quite sound right. And it's a dark chocolate balsamic.
Ooh, that's very lovely.
Yeah,
There
and they
is
did seem like they knew the difference between real and fake balsamic, and they assured me that they did in fact do it the real way. But that's I have to take that at face value because I haven't researched it.
there is a certain amount of it that gets a little bit weird and complicated because I believe balsamic. It's like it might not be necessarily balsamic as it were, but balsamic vinegar di Modena or something like that. I forget exactly the
Yeah, I think
Italian, but
that's
those
what
have
it
to come in.
is.
That's an AOP designated area. So
Right.
it has to come from that area. It has to go through a very particular aging process. And apparently it can only be bottled in one of like three bottle shapes, which all of which are a little bit funky looking. So
Huh,
yeah.
that's kind of wild. But that's like a thing with wine also, where the bottle shape means something and it's even protected, as I understand.
Some of them are quite protected. Yeah. Some of them are less so. You will never see any of that in America, as it were. But a lot of, say, Alsatian wines will pretty much all come in the same exact sort of bottle. Bordeaux's, you'll naturally see some very common bottle shapes in there.
Alsatian. I like that word. I don't think I've ever heard that word before, but I assume you mean from the Alsace region, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's good.
Very
I've
fascinating area up there.
definitely been saying whatever that. I don't know what the demonym for that is that I've been using, but like I'll probably just say like from Alsace Lorraine or
Yeah, totally.
yeah, cool. Alsatian. That's cool. I like that. Learn a new word sometimes.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, Alsatian, mostly wine, so we're probably not going to be talking about that. You also very rarely see them, though, any of those barrels or anything like that used for whiskey aging, I believe, in no small part because they rest a lot of those wines these days in cement or stainless steel, concrete or stainless steel, I should say. So we're not really going to be seeing too much of that hanging around with whiskey and such, as long with a great deal of German wines and other things like that. But yeah, let's see. Another thing that I did find that
Yep.
we'll probably get to talking about a little bit more, I'll just mention it right here. But which of these? But so I believe, yeah, so Bardstown Bourbon Company, is releasing fairly soon here an Amaro Nonino cask. Amaro Nonino might very well known as a somewhat expensive Amaro, and the only Amaro that you should be using along with the Wild Turkey Generations right there, a release which I am somewhat excited about, honestly. But Amaro Nonino, sort of bittersweet Italian liqueur, very, very good. Has been getting steadily more expensive the past 5 years or so. I believe it used to be around 35, 40, and these days it's about 60 or so. So take that all as you will. This is a very interesting finish on it, but we'll probably get back to a little bit more because it's going to be talking about some exotic finishes and things like that a little bit later on into our discussion today, right here.
Yeah, just real quick, you turned into a little bit of a robot there for a second. Did you
Oh
say
no.
I think you said a very good wine, and I think that's all that you broke up on.
Oh no, yeah. So Nonino, a very good Italian liqueur, bittersweet Italian liqueur. I believe it's spirit based as opposed to wine based. Some Amaros are, but this one was a little bit higher, I believe. But it's going to have some very interesting bitter, spicy characteristics that it would lend to a whiskey. So I'm quite fascinated by how that would turn out.
Nice. And so this is kind of getting into a little bit of a segue to our later topic in today's discussion, which is going to be interesting cask finishes. But I believe we had a couple of other releases to talk about first. So the other picture in this slide here is Wild Turkey Generations.
Mm.
I heard a little bit about this one. As I understand it, this is the first time Wild Turkey has released a bottle that is 3 generations worth of the Russell family collaborating on a single release, which I was actually surprised to hear because there's been a lot of like the Master's Keep father and son kind of things where you've had Jimmy and Eddie both have their names on something, but and maybe even Eddie and Bruce, but I think this is the first time we're seeing Jimmy, Eddie, and Bruce Russell all on the same release. It does turn out to be quite expensive for all that, as I understand.
Yeah.
I haven't looked up a retail price because it is so overwhelmingly unlikely I'll ever even see this. Um, and I don't know that I would pay what they're asking because my appetite for super luxury products is rather limited, I think. I prefer spreading my money around to lots of less expensive, interesting things.
Very much the same. This getting into let's see. So this is a 9-year-old, 14,
Hold
and
on.
15 year.
You are breaking up quite
Ooh.
badly there.
Oh no! Let's see what is happening here.
Let me check my internet.
Whoa. 2, 3. Ooh.
Yeah, you're back. Cool.
Am I back? All right,
Yeah.
testing. Super
Yeah.
weird. I'm so sorry about that.
No
I don't know what
problem.
is going on.
Just go ahead and repeat what you were saying.
So this is the Wild Turkey Generations is going to be a blend of 9, 12, 14, and 15-year-old bourbons. Now that is great for a lot of people who like bourbons. For my part, I am a much bigger fan of my bourbons a little bit younger than that, I would say. Oh, Genji, you started getting into makeup. I'm so sorry. That's that's a comparable
Yeah.
hobby in price to whiskey. It's a tough one.
And at some point, you end up finding that some of those cheaper products maybe don't make your skin feel good, and so you want to upgrade a little bit, and you end up finding that balance of price and value. I think any sort of hobby that involves premium priced products, you end up finding a balance on that curve that works for you and your budget. Yeah. By the way,
Yeah,
Genji, if you have a recommendation on a balsamic glaze, we definitely take recommendations here. So feel free to send that along. Doesn't have to be right now. Feel free to like write a comment on the video or anything like that. Yeah. By the
there
way,
was a great one that they had at Costco at some point. It was like mixed with sugar and some other things like that. I do believe to make it more of a glaze, but it was from the IGP and such.
Genji says I watch several review videos to find the best affordable brands. Yep, and that is hopefully the service that we're trying to provide as well as reviewers and discussers of whiskey.
Hopefully.
All right,
So
cool.
speaking
Was
of
this the
that,
last
actually,
of our
that was the last of our little
pre-prepared?
announcements right here. I want to say, yeah.
I think I had one more that I wanted to look
Ooh,
at that was pretty cool. Hang on while I go find it.
absolutely, yeah.
Talk amongst yourself.
Talk amongst myself. I see.
Oh, there was. Oh, you sent me the TTB label also for the Bardstown Amaro,
Yes, I
um,
did.
which I don't know that there's really anything to add there. Or
No,
maybe
not
there is.
particularly.
Maybe there
There
is.
is
Let me
some
let me
fun
put it
things
up
about
anyway, just because
the blend, I believe.
yeah, we're gonna end up looking at more of these over time. I think we sort of when we started this channel, uh, we had started. I think our very first episode was we looked at a bunch of new release labels, and we find ourselves coming back around to that. I don't understand that
17
comment,
months.
Pawn. Could you clarify what you mean?
I think. Well,
Um,
so I ordered. So I was looking at some of the Twoth glasses. I do believe
oh, that one.
that
Okay, the
must be what that's a
glasses.
reference to.
Yeah. Oh, let
Yeah.
me. So
No,
that'll be
this one
fun to
is
put
not
up.
one of the Twoth glasses. I'm afraid this is just a Copita, I think. But no, I do want to order some of the Twoths. Those look amazing. Beautiful Irish glasses. One day I'll talk about my opinions on Glencairn glasses. But
Where the
and
heck did that picture go?
oh,
Where we were talking about the that funky glass shape.
the Nonino, yeah, it has some pretty interesting information on the label. Actually, I'm always a big fan of a little bit more of that kind of thing, like the blend and such.
Yeah, the problem with trying to find content after stream has started is that it basically doesn't. One
Yeah, it
doesn't
doesn't work very well.
one doesn't simply find the content from days ago. Oh, there it is. Here. For lack of a better thing to show right this minute. Um Yeah, these are the glasses that we're talking about, so we can just wrap up that
Yeah.
conversation. Just like an alternative to the Glencairn that is more, I guess, more traditional for Irish whiskey. I wouldn't really know because I don't follow Irish whiskey that closely, but it looks like it
I'm
pretty much hits your same. I've seen some funky bourbon glasses too that look like old school light bulbs where they've got like a little base and a tiny
yeah,
thing, and it's just like straight sides with a little lip that does this at the top.
very
And
fun those.
this has a very similar idea to that. Like in general, as long as your glass has a wider bowl and a narrower opening, whether it flares out or not, this is going to roughly solve the problem of enhancing the nose on a spirit, right? So like Glencairns, Glencairns have this sort of wide bowl, narrow opening. Um, this is a slightly wider opening, but same idea. I don't actually have any glasses that flare out, I think, but also your typical cognac glass. And I
Beautiful those.
apologize that
Snifters are
these are
great.
dirty. I haven't cleaned my glasses that I used
Have you ever
a couple
seen one
days
of the
ago.
old side tangent? Have you ever seen one of the old snifter cradles? So snifter cradles are these beautiful old contraptions that you can so the thing about brandy and what you drink in snifters is you ideally want your brandy to be a little bit warmer. Snifter cradles are a little cradle for the glass above a candle. I'm sending you a somewhat newer version of that, but you sort of set it above a candle so that it heats up your brandy a little bit. I've heard that it's actually a really wonderful thing to do for Octomore and things like that as well. Very, very rich, smoky whiskeys.
Interesting. Well, I might have to give that a
Very,
try.
yeah. Hmm.
All right, let me go find. There was one more. I think I put in Geekery.
Was
Really
there
going to
one
embarrass
more that
myself
I'm
if this
looking at?
takes too long. Um,
Oh, you were looking at the Octomore 4.2, weren't you?
not well.
Or was that
Yes,
just the
but
one that you have?
yes, but I was looking at the Cedar Ridge. Do you remember I posted that link?
The Takai cast from Cedar Ridge. Yep, that is right up above the original Fry Ranch that I posted.
Oh,
It was
there you go.
at
Thank you,
1:20
thank you.
a.m. today. Damn,
Got
Demi.
it. Got it. Well, that's your time. That's your time.
Oh, fair. Yeah, fair. My time. Notably
I was
different
like,
from your
I'm
time.
pretty sure I was in bed 1 o'clock last night, but yeah, tend to go to sleep late. Um,
Is
yeah,
my
cool.
time
All right,
different from
so
your time this time of year?
um,
I don't know.
yeah, Arizona doesn't do daylight savings time, but we haven't switched yet, so I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know. All right, anyway, um,
Anyways.
so yeah, here's a recent announcement from the Cedar Ridge, Iowa Instagram page where they are introducing a Tokai cask. This is again a nice segue to our main topic of today, which is interesting finishes. Um, I kind of want to I want to wrap up the stream with that though. I don't know that I have much to say
Yeah.
about this. So
Oh,
other
I have
than
a little
hey,
bit to
that's
say
cool.
probably.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, we'll be talking about some barrel finishes and things like that. Would you like to go to one of our other topics before we get on to our exotic barrel finishes right here, or pop right on into that right now?
I think one of our other topics, and where did
Right. So
the
let me know. So
Octomore go
talk to
now?
me. How was visiting? You visited some ASMW distilleries recently. How was that?
Yeah. So I believe that. So I've gone on 2 trips lately. And I forget how much we've actually had a chance to just sit around and talk about stuff that has happened, for me, for us in the world of whiskey, etc. So I will say less about going to Portland, which is a regular thing for me. When I went to
Indeed.
Portland, I did visit Caitlin Bartlemay at the Clear Creek Distillery. We've had her on the podcast since then. I also
Wonderful person.
visited. She's great, and we're gonna have her back for Brandy. Keep your eyes peeled. We haven't scheduled that yet. We're
Brandy.
pretty much just waiting for her schedule to calm down a little bit, rather than overload her with yet another podcast appearance. But yeah, that's coming soon. We'll let you know. And I also visited Westward, which is always fun. and this time I got to speak with Jonathan Harris. For some reason, like I keep glitching over his name because he has a tag that says John Boy, and I'm like, does he prefer to be called John or Jonathan, or it's one of those things. Who is the education manager? Is how he introduced himself to me over email. And he told me I could find him in his classroom, and that was since it's been a year since I'd visited Westward. I was like, "There's a classroom." They've done a little bit of a renovation since the last time I was there, and they actually have a room at the back of the sort of tasting room bar area that is now a sort of, it's a long table with a bunch of chairs, and it's where you would run like a large group tasting or that sort of thing. And after the tour, we sat down in there and talked about a whole bunch of different stuff. I've been meaning to do a bit of a write-up of that, but I have been incredibly busy, and we have to prioritize the sorts of things that we actually spend our time on. And doing distillery write-ups is definitely a thing that matters, but working on book research has definitely come back more to the forefront, and so I'm pretty much limiting my efforts into things that more or less directly feed into that, unless it just happens to be my day-to-day sort of things that I post on Instagram. So anyway, that was I also tried to go to the Bull Run, I think, not Blue Run, Bull Run Distillery, but my day was unfortunately way too full and I ran out of time, and they hadn't gotten back to me anyway, so I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to do anything other than stop into the tasting room for a cocktail. So I decided it would be best to just leave that visit for another time. But they also have very interesting whiskey. I have an example in my cabinet back there. So that was the Portland visit. And I've probably talked a bit about that before, and I'm there's for some reason I haven't said a whole lot about it. Mostly I think because I was told things that some of which are secret until a certain date, some of which are secret indefinitely. And that's a pretty cool thing to have. Like, yeah, there's cool stuff, right? And that's pretty much all I can say on that topic. And I have been saying little about either of those distillery visits because I'm not sure that I won't screw up live unless I have a bulleted list prepared or I've already done a write-up. So I'm waiting till I've done the write-up before I verbally speak with any detail on those topics. Now, something I don't have to be at all secretive about is I also went to San Diego recently.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about hearing some of these things right here.
Yeah, so San Diego has a fair number of craft distilleries. I researched, I believe, 10 to 12 of them that were listed on various lists online. 2 of them, I think, were permanently closed, which is a shame. There is a cluster that is sort of up, like going pretty much well on towards LA. There's like 2 or 3 of them up there, which was just too far for my agenda that weekend.
Which ones were those 2?
I don't remember. And,
fair enough. Yeah, understand.
Yeah, it's like it's been a month, I think, since that trip. Yeah, it's been a month since that trip. It's been 5 weeks. So I don't remember the details. Yeah, that was the weekend of September 30th. So it's been a while. I haven't had a chance to talk about this trip yet. If I had my laptop up on my desk, I could actually check because I haven't actually closed out of that window yet. So all the research I did is actually still there. So there was a couple that were far away. Yeah. Let's get back on topic. There was a couple that
I need to be real quiet for just 1 second right here. There we go.
Nice.
Yeah. We'll talk about this later.
Okay. So you're not even showing me what it is. All right.
Ooh, well, I can show you what it is. The fall is cut from Del Bach.
And we're going to talk about that when I have some of that in my hands, I think. Indeed. Or we can talk about it today.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop you.
We'll talk about it in relation to another thing that we're going to be touching on a little bit later on. We'll talk about it in much more detail later on right here.
Sounds perfect. Okay, so list of... let's not do lists. Lists are bad. Yeah. So there was a cluster that was too far away from me. There was a cluster that was in downtown San Diego, which I kind of felt, and it was only like 2, and I kind of felt like I'm not super interested in those anyway, and I'm probably going to end up in downtown San Diego at some point. So some other trip, I'll go visit those. And then there was a cluster in Miramar, and Miramar was interesting to me because when I lived in San Diego for a summer for an internship, I I lived pretty close to Miramar, so I actually did spend some time there. And like this area in Miramar was actually more of like an industrial district, which is kind of the place that you tend to find distilleries anyway. Um, but there were three distilleries that were in that sort of close group that ranged from American single malt to craft rum to a little bit of everything. And some of these distilleries, a couple of these, you may never have heard before if you aren't from San Diego, and one will be very familiar to you. So the order that I visited the distilleries was Seven Caves Distillery, which I had heard from rum enthusiasts made excellent rum. But I discovered when I was setting up my trip to go there from their website that they also make an American single malt.
Oh my gosh, you actually found some?
I
Oh,
actually found some.
it looked like they were completely sold out when I was looking this stuff up for your trip. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that in a second. So the second one that I went to was this is the one that you'll recognize was Cutwater Spirits.
Mm.
Cutwater makes
They've been getting real big on YouTube ads recently. I've been getting so many of those things.
Yeah, you've probably heard of Cutwater from their canned cocktails, which they make a lot of. I believe they said 30 something of them, a lot of which use rum or tequila. And of course, the tequila and mezcal products that they carry, they apparently don't use mezcal in any of their canned cocktails. But the tequila and mezcal products they carry at the tasting room are, of course, from Mexico because those are protected designation of origin. And the rest of the spirits that they make, vodka, gin, various kinds of whiskey, are all made at the distillery. Again, I plan on doing a write-up. I have some pictures that should be interesting. Fancy Panky. And the third distillery I went to, I actually thought I would like best. They do a little bit of everything. They have pot stills. They seemed like they would have really good like craft rum in particular. I ended up liking their brandy and their brandy finished whiskey best. And they had a flavored rum, like I think it was like an espresso rum or something like that, that I thought was really good. But overall, especially with the whiskey, and the whiskey is where I'm not going to judge a distillery based on their whiskey, but I am most interested in whiskey. So as far as the whiskey goes, it was a little bit disappointing. Just for the specs, the flavor didn't match up. Now, to be fair, that was after I had already done 2 full-on distillery visits, so it's entirely possible that my palate was just shot. But I didn't feel compelled to buy any of their whiskey to bring home. I did buy whiskey from Seven Caves and from Cutwater. So, okay, let's get back to talking about Seven Caves.
I'd love to hear about this.
So this one
Their
here,
rums looked amazing as well. I was really interested in this little guy, though.
yeah. So so Seven Caves, Jeff Longenecker, if I'm saying that correctly, is basically a one-man operation. A thing you should know if you're going to go to distilleries in San Diego is that it might be a California thing. This is the first time I've gone on distillery tours in California. It might be a San Diego thing, but in whatever jurisdiction, unless you make an appointment for a private party tasting, they will not serve you more than 1.5 ounces of spirits for a tasting type of thing. There's various liability things and laws and whatever. So basically just apparently the ABC in California is really big about if you are not a private party that has basically said like, yes, we will take responsibility for ourselves if we drink too much, they cannot serve you anything that approaches over service. To that end, Jeff doesn't allow anyone to visit his distillery who doesn't have an appointment. So make sure you go on his website 24 hours in advance at least and get yourself an appointment because his distillery is absolutely worth visiting. And I'm glad that somebody told me because I would have missed out on that. Right. It was like at first, he was like, no, we're not open to the public. Right. Like that's the initial response. His operation there is so small. Right. And he's got the tasting table, which is a nice, it's a live oak edge and all that directly in the tasting room. Directly in the distillery is the tasting room. He not only makes craft rums, which the star of the show we actually bought 2 bottles of, was that he had done a vacuum infused jasmine rum, jasmine
This
tea
is the
rum.
thing I was most excited about.
I
I knew
actually haven't I
might
haven't
say
opened it. I haven't opened it and tasted it at home yet, so I'd have to go to the other room to grab it if you wanted me to like offer a live opinion on it. But what I will say is that um, some of his rums were genuinely like funky, like tropical style rums, and some of them
oh,
were
that's
definitely a
so good.
much more straightforward, like you'd expect, but like a very flavorful version of um, that sort of clean, non-funky kind of rum. He had a little bit of both. This is a guy who clearly distills for the sheer enjoyment of distilling. And he makes what he wants to make because he thinks it's fun. And a lot of those things are craft rum. He told me the very first thing he distilled at the distillery, before he had like a distiller's license, he made fuel alcohol, which he dumped, and he made stillage for his um, dunnage. Sorry. Wow. Why am I not? I can't words right now. What's it called?
What are you saying? I don't think I follow you.
The sort of
Made.
precursor for funky rum. What's it called?
Oh gosh,
Why am I failing to recall this right now? Dunder.
thunder. That's it. Thank you.
The very first thing he did in setting up his distillery, like weeks he had applied for the license, didn't have it yet, but he like did a run so that he could make dunnage. Right. Let it ferment, run it through the still, put the stillage back into the dunder tank. That was the first thing that he did there. So he has dundered rum. He doesn't necessarily do all of his rum with dunder. I think that the jasmine is a non-dundered rum.
Oh,
After he's distilled the rum, he then redistills it through a vacuum still to cold infuse the jasmine tea into it. And it comes out tasting wonderfully like a jasmine tea with all the complexity you'd expect from a high quality jasmine tea. And since my wife is
this.
from the part of China that makes jasmine tea, I would say that she's more qualified than most people to comment on the quality of that. And she said it was quite good. She bought one for us and one for a gift for a family member.
Ooh, very exciting. Yeah, so I've been looking at ordering these guys online because they're also not that expensive. $30 for the jasmine rum on their website.
For the stuff that they ship. So there was a bunch of
Yeah,
other, like we tasted a lot of cool stuff there. Um,
yeah,
he I guess he likes sort of memeing on people. So
sure.
what he told me was, so I inquired about this, the American single malt, expecting that he was sold out because you can't buy it online. They are very limited batches. But what he said
Hmm.
was he doesn't sell them online because a lot of people will buy stuff like that, not really knowing what it is and expecting a bourbon. Because apparently at some point he got a
Sure.
lot of recognition for having really good bourbon.
Hmm.
And people who liked bourbon started ordering from him and then complaining when they got stuff that wasn't bourbon that they didn't understand and essentially, wasting the appreciation of this liquid. So what he decided to do instead was for his very limited batch stuff, especially the American single malt products, he will only sell it to you at the distillery after you've had an opportunity to taste it.
Oh, excellent. That's a good way to do it, I feel.
So
Especially with that sort of situation right there. Yeah.
so it's pretty cool, right? It's not that it's sold out, it's just that it's not available online. So if you are a fan of American single malt and you're willing to try what is sometimes, I'm going to pour a little bit of this, by the way. um,
Absolutely do it. They're such good bottles too. I'm a big fan of the aesthetic, of the style around the whole thing.
you know what I said? I
What?
said to him, hey, this reminds me of the Kohana bottles. And he says, it's exactly the same one.
Oh, that's so good.
And I was thinking along those lines because, so Kohana's a rum out of Hawaii.
Mhm.
And because his rum was sort of that style, I was like, oh, this is reminding me of Kohana. It's got that sort of agricole thing going on. He's had a bunch of different styles of rum, right? Um, and so like he pulled this out, and lo and behold, it's exactly the same. This is the 350 milliliter size of bottle, but it is exactly the same form factor that they use at Kohana for their 375. Yeah, the half size bottle. I don't know if I
Yeah,
said that.
that's
This
excellent.
is
That's
this is a
wonderful.
375. I think before I said 350. This is a 375. So they're half size bottle, right? Same form factor. So this one, after I tasted it, had to have it because this is just the coolest thing. Um, you may be familiar, people who follow American single malt, that American single malt often comes from a brewer's tradition. There's a lot of craft brewers in the United States, which are slowly transitioning into craft distilling, especially as American single malt becomes a thing. Because if you are making a 100% barley beer, it is sort of one step back and a couple of steps forward to make yourself an American single malt, right? Don't add the hops and distill it and age it, right? That's going from craft brewing to craft distilling. If you believe that the quality of your wash, which is basically beer, is the precursor to an excellent American single malt, if you start from craft brewing, you end up with, a craft brewer's style of American single malt. If you were to distill a beer, like a proper beer that has been hopped and all of that, what you would get would not actually be American single malt because the hops are not an allowed ingredient. But in this case, this was a distilled beer. It was a sour that had no hops. It was a fruited sour. I think it was not a fruited sour. I forget he said it was wild fermented or something along those lines. But so that was the base whiskey here. And you do get a nice note of like apricot and sort of stone fruit on the nose. That's the first thing that stands out to you. The other cool thing about this whiskey is that it is aged in one of his own previous batch heated American single malt casks. So you have a whiskey distilled from a sour beer, aged in peated casks, and it comes across as fruity and delicately smoky, which is absolutely wonderful.
So it is okay. That sounds absolutely wonderful.
There was a few other things we got to try there. He had a pair of barrels. So he also he does like contract blending and like lots of different stuff. So like he had whiskey from other distilleries in there. He had his own whiskey. Sometimes he blends his own with source stuff. He's just trying to make good tasting products, and a lot of times to spec. Whatever somebody wants. So and he'll let you taste some of that stuff. Some of it is like, no, that completely belongs to somebody. I can't let you taste any of it, right? But it's like he'll let you taste a lot of the stuff that's in there if you ask. He had a pair of barrels of bourbon, and he wouldn't tell me anything about them at first. He said, "Here, I call these heaven and hell. Taste them." And so I tasted heaven, and I was like, "Wow, okay, that's like it tastes like a really old bourbon, right?" I tasted hell. Wow, that tastes like that's like Pappy level. Like that tastes like it's probably like a 15-year plus. Like, really keep in mind. This is a distillery in South California, very warm climate.
Yeah, in San Diego. Yeah, that's why I'm a little.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what you're going to say next.
So these barrels, heaven and hell, filled at exactly the same time, new oak, sitting exactly next to each other in the exact same aging conditions.
Yeah.
And one of them came out light and fruity, still like an old bourbon kind of, like it's been aged by the heat, right? And the other one came out like it was 5 to 10 years older. Exactly the same in every way.
That is fascinating. Yeah. That's a certain thing that we deal with down at Del Bach as well. But just the heat around here is somewhat unpredictable in many ways. It's very, very interesting just what it can do, especially when you get to talking about rick houses back east where it's much, much more humid. Still quite hot, but much, much more humid. And when you're talking about like the differences in aging, you're talking about things on different levels of a building right here. But yeah, no, in the heat of the Southwest, stuff just works weird sometimes.
And sometimes it maybe comes down to the personality of the barrel, which I think that's got to be that's the distinguishing feature here, right? Something about those barrels, because everything else, all else equal, something about those barrels was a little bit different, and it made a huge difference over the period of 5 or 6 years that they were aging, which was like the actual age, if I recall correctly. I forget if he said 4 or 5 or 6 years, but it was somewhere in that range.
Okay. Yeah.
So that was really cool. Yeah.
That sounds like a place I'll have to visit if I ever pop over to San Diego, quite honestly. Yeah.
Also, I want to get him on the podcast, but I feel like he mostly doesn't Mostly he doesn't want to
Doesn't he
speak
do that?
publicly, I think, but like I'll see
Yeah,
if I can
sure.
convince him because I think he's got a great personality, a good sense of humor, and he's a lot of fun. It's really fun to talk to somebody who is like absolutely in love with what they do.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the situation here.
I have
To give you an
several of his
idea,
rums and gins in my cart as we speak, actually, on another
nice.
tab on my
He's
computer.
also got, and apparently he supplies a bar in Tacoma, which I haven't gotten around to visiting yet. And
Ooh.
one of the things that he sends up here is actually barrel aged maple syrups.
Yeah, so they have that on their website along with the maple barrel aged soy sauce too, which
Yeah,
is great.
we didn't get a chance to try that one at the distillery. I forget why he said, but the maple syrup ones was kind of wild because there was a barrel in the corner that just like had a bucket under it because it was that
Oh,
leaky.
that's great. Yeah.
And there was one of them I think was it was either whiskey or rum finished, and the other one was like coffee infused, like espresso infused or something like that. And we couldn't buy that one because he was down to like his last couple of bottles of it.
Oh, sure.
So we're probably gonna have to look up that bar and see what we can buy because that was
Indeed.
really, really good maple syrup. And okay, so one last thing to give you an idea
Yeah.
of the sense of humor of this gentleman. He looked at Kentucky Owl and said, "I can source MGP and do the same thing." Um, and so
Is
he
Kentucky Owl MGP?
that's what he said. I didn't double check that, but I would believe it.
Understandable,
At
yeah.
least at least in the past, I think.
Sure.
Basically, this was a gag, right? Whenever he spots the Bourbon Bros or in the distillery, he's like, "Here, try this, right? This is my version of Kentucky Owl or something like that, right?" And it's and he's got his own like his own knockoff version of like is some other bird from California, like whatever. I forget what the label was, but it was a cute little thing, and like just to bring it out and be like, here, you like Kentucky, I'll try this. And it's like more or less it's at least the same idea, and it's in the ballpark of flavor wise as I understand it, but I've never tried Kentucky Owl, so I can't really speak on that. But yeah, that's the sort of thing that he does, right? Like everything he does is either a passion project or a joke of some kind.
Sure.
And
I believe that.
that's just like a wonderful mix of stuff.
Yeah. He's got a lot of fascinating stuff that he was making. So yeah, that's a very fun one to have learned about through this trip, honestly, because I'd never heard of the place before you had talked about going to San Diego as well. So yeah.
Now I finally have concluded. So moving on.
Mhm.
So let's talk about Malahat next because it's more or less I have less to say. Nice
Yeah.
little interlude. Malahat's cool because the entrance of it is they had it done up like a pirate ship kind of like theme where there's like this sort of maze in order to get into the distillery in the first place. So it had a kind of speakeasy feel to it, except that like what else could this be except the distillery because it says Malahat on the outside and it has like a thing
Sure.
that's talking about like Malahat's named after a ship, a trade ship, um, from the 19th century, whatever. So like you walk through these like wooden rafters and like and
Oh, I love that label as well.
the Malahat stuff.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for a good ship.
It was a very cool looking distillery, and like the inside of it is like they've got the tasting room and the stills are sort of lined up around, and they weren't distilling when I was there. It was like after at that point I think it was after 6 p.m. They may not have been distilling that day at all. Um, we almost gave up because we actually couldn't find our way through the maze to get in. Basically, there was
Oh,
like not to spoil it, but like basically there is a wall that turns out it's not a wall, and you kind of just walk through it. It looks like because it's done up the rest of the way, the way the
yeah.
rest of the place is. Like they've got these sort of burlap sack kind of decorations over everything, and ends up being like the push the sack aside, and now you get to go through.
Oh, that's
Um,
fun.
and like kind of the only reason we didn't give up is because it was clear that there was a solution here and that there was a distillery inside, right? Like, because you could hear people chatting, and like it wasn't that secret, right? But it was a cool little like speakeasy thing. So the experience of going there was cool, and they'll
Sure.
let you build your own flight from like they had around 20 different things. It was a menu with like 3 columns, and they had like rum and gin and whiskey and brandy, and some of them were flavored, most of them were not. Some of them finished in other things, and basically we tried. They had a corn whiskey and a bourbon and a rye and an American single malt. Tried all of those. Was not terribly impressed by any of them, but the rye I think was the best. And also tried the some I think it was the brandy. It was a red wine brandy. I forget which kind.
Okay.
And that was interesting. And then they had I think it was a rum finished in brandy, and like that was pretty interesting. But none of it was compelling enough to go like, yeah, I want to buy a bottle. But I think the place was cool to visit. So like if you're in the area and you want a cocktail and you want to do a little whiskey flight, I could recommend going there, right? Like there's not much to lose.
It seems a little more like once again a rum distillery that was also kind of had also been more recently branching out into whiskey, or would you say not quite that?
I will say Jeff from Seven Caves recommended specifically the stuff he recommended for me to try was not the whiskey.
Okay.
So his opinion also was that their rum and brandy were their better products.
Mm-hmm.
So and when I had looked them up and decided to go there, I was mostly thinking rum. But
Okay.
when I was there, when I was in there, despite myself, I had to try the whiskey, right? Um,
Sure, I get that.
so of course I got to sort of form my own opinion. Like, yeah, the whiskey isn't the reason you go there. The rum and the brandy is why you go there.
Yeah. So
Not to
once
mention the
again,
cocktails.
their single malt is not on their website. It was it a somewhat sort of a similar situation to Seven Caves right there, or is it a somewhat newer release, or is it just very limited?
I'll say that Seven Caves was the smallest distillery of all of these. Right,
Okay.
like it was like a tiny one room thing with like less than 20 barrels in the entire place and like tiny stills and all that. Malahat was definitely bigger, but like very much still craft size, right? Like smaller than Clear Creek, if that gives you any of an idea, right? Like because Clear Creek is probably the craft distillery that I have the most knowledge of. I don't know about you.
Okay.
Um, like it's still on the small side for sure. Like all of the racks of barrels were in the distillery itself, right? Like they had a few rows of racks of barrels next to the stills, essentially. So that kind of thing. Um, I think it might be the American single malt is just a smaller, like maybe an experimental kind of release. You could try it at the distillery. I'll
Mhm.
also say, um, I think it's aged in new oak, and it wasn't doing anything particularly special. And the people who were there uh, didn't get into like the nerdy details of the process that I would have liked to have known about.
Sure.
The distiller, him or herself, was not actually there, so I couldn't really
Mhm.
ask. It was just the tasting room staff running the register. There was a fun thing though, and I ended up spending a lot more time talking to this person than actually tasting the whiskey ultimately, because it turns out that one of the people who was at the bar there went to school with my just after college roommate, uh,
Oh, that's fun.
who was from a town over from me in Texas in the first place, right? So it was sort of
Oh,
like a second degree connection, somebody that I grew up like less than 20 miles from. And we basically just talked about being transplants out of Texas into other places
hmm.
for a good solid amount of time. And did the usual thing like, did you know so and so? And of course we didn't, because thousands of people went and like came and went. Although aside from that random connection that my roommate happened to go to the same high school. Uh, so that has nothing at all to do with whiskey. Anyway, so that's Mallow. The actually more interesting, if anything, distillery that I visited. I mean, Seven Caves by far takes the cake, but Cutwater was really interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
Cutwater, the building is shaped like a ship, kind of in like sort of weird geometric neo modern architecture ways, right? And you can see their big column still. They have more than one still, but their big column still is like in a glass clad room that you can see directly through on the outside of the building. That they like just that whole still is on display as soon as you walk up. They got a big bar where you can order all kinds of cocktails. They make their rum, they make their whiskey, various kinds. They make their vodka and gin, right? Um, when we went on the tour, so the tour comes with a tasting flight of your choice, which unfortunately didn't give me necessarily the sampling of things that I wanted to taste. I ahead of time ordered. How did I do this? I ordered a rum cocktail ahead of time to get an idea of their rum. I think just a daiquiri. So like I was or a Mai Tai actually. So I was going like I can taste the rum, right? Like get an idea of what the rum
Sure.
is like. On the tour, actually, we ended up picking the tequila and mezcal flight uh, because my wife likes tequila, and so far has been consistently her most favorite spirit. So figured like if we were gonna buy a bottle of something from that distillery, it was most likely going to be tequila, and so we did. In fact, I did actually think to bring that out. So this is the tequila
Ooh,
from
that's a
Cutwater.
fun one.
Got a tequila añejo, which was better than the blanco or joven. I forget which one. So they had like a blanco and an añejo of both tequila and mezcal. That was the flight. Um,
Fun.
the
How was
mezcal, I
Añejo?
personally prefer reposado. So like neither of those mezcals were my speed, but
Understandable.
their tequila añejo has the right balance of the peppery and vanilla. This
Sure.
is probably one of the better añejos that I've had in this price point.
All right, we're gonna need to pause for a second. Give me one moment. Hey Genji, why are you putting tequila in a pina colada? It's a rum drink, to my knowledge.
That didn't quite register with me as a problem either. So to be fair,
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like you can put tequila in a pina colada, I guess, but it's a little weird if you do. I think
that
Palomas,
well, yeah,
absolutely
the
excellent.
hashtag. Well, there's your problem. Like,
Yeah, tequila, very, very strong sort of drink. Um,
can't remember what the
but
drink was, but it probably had tequila.
yeah, no, definitely. I believe Genji. I just wanted to call you out on that.
Margarita,
Margarita
perhaps.
could be a margarita, could be a paloma, could be a couple
Ooh,
of other things.
Paloma.
A Mexican firing squad is probably one of my favorite tequila cocktails.
I recently watched
Um,
a video from How to Drink where I think Greg totally convinced me that a Paloma made with grapefruit
yeah, that
oleosaccharum
yeah, that was
is
an
the way to
amazing video.
go, but that's a lot of work.
It's so much work. I mean, my two favorite drinks in that probably the Paloma and his Queen Park Swizzle in that video. Both a Queen Park Swizzle, if you haven't had it, absolutely amazing cocktail. One of my favorites, along with one of Greg's other favorite cocktails, the Trinidad Sour. It's going to
One of
sound
those
weird, but it uses like an ounce and a half of Angostura bitters.
one of those
Um,
drinks with blended ice, but not like a frozen margarita where it's like a slushy, right?
could have, I mean, if it's got blended ice, it could have been a frozen margarita.
Paloma's built over crushed ice, right?
Not really. It's kind of like it's mainly just like a tequila and soda, but the soda is usually a grapefruit soda.
Okay. So clearly we're talking out of our depth here, but yeah, tequila's not for everyone.
Yeah,
I definitely left the age of 23, 24, 25 years old going like tequila is the drink that I have before I have a bad time. I mean, I have a great time and then I have a bad time. You know what I mean?
here's my suggestion to everyone who wants to get into tequila first. You're going to actually do a really weird thing with tequila, and you're going to start with you're probably going to want to start with a little bit more of the expensive stuff. Now, here's my suggestion. Outside of the Southwest, where we can find quite a lot of really good tequilas, you're going to want to look for it might be it's probably going to be called tequila cristalino. It is usually a reposado or añejo tequila that is going to be filtered back through uh, charcoal until it becomes clear again. This is going to be some really interesting stuff because you're going to get a lot of those that vanilla character from the barrel. You're going to get a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more creaminess, but you're also going to have it brought back down from a lot of that direct oak and sort of tannic influence back down to some kind of more interesting kind of tequila flavors and working with those sort of things in that way. I've got one called Identity over in the bar that tastes pretty much exactly like, what's the word for it? Kind of creme brulee-esque flavors. These ones are going to be a little bit more expensive in some cases in most cases, than your reposados or something like that. But I highly suggest starting out with them because they are the sort of most inoffensive in many ways, and then moving back into some of the cheaper and some of the more aggressive styles of tequila that can be quite tasty, as it were. Pardon me for my random tangent right there.
Yeah, I mean, we still need to do a tequila episode, and I think we're probably gonna have
Oh,
to
we
break down
do.
all these styles, right? Like tequila, like
Tequila, pechuga,
yeah,
sotol,
yeah,
mezcal, all that kind of shit.
yeah. All right, so the short version is tequila is only one type of agave spirit. Uses blue agave,
Mm,
comes from a specific region of Mexico. Mezcal uses not necessarily blue agave. I think I've heard tequila is technically a subtype of mezcal rather than the other way around. People usually
yeah,
say
so
mezcal
mezcal is
smoky
the
tequila.
umbrella term. Yeah.
But mezcal doesn't actually have to be smoky the same way that scotch doesn't have to be smoky. It just turns out that people that difference makes an impression on people, so they go, "Oh, mezcal smoky. Oh, scotch is smoky," right? Because if they don't get the smoky, they think, "Oh, it's just that other thing that I've had before," pretty much. Really high quality mezcal or agave spirits that aren't even from that region that are just it's agave spirit, right? Um, Basically sort of around that $100 price point, which is quite steep, I know. For if you are not convinced that you like a type of spirit, I could see never trying that, and that would be perfectly valid. But having had people that I trust recommend, if you haven't liked tequila yet and you like this other stuff in whiskey and whatever, you should try this tequila or this
Mm.
agave spirit from this place. And yes, it's going to cost you $100, but just trust me, it's going to be worth it. And all I can say is, for my personal tastes, they were absolutely right. And I don't go crazy with buying agave spirits every so often, but I mean, I don't go crazy with buying them super often. But every so often, when I want to have an agave spirit and I'm in the mood for something fancy, I pour a little bit of that, and there are just an array of flavors that you haven't had before. There's a different kind of funky that happens on the edges of rum and that happens on the edges of tequila and agave spirits that you just don't get in any kind of whiskey, including heavily peated whiskey.
There is a particular kind of mesquite vibe that you get from very smoky mezcals and things like that, and sotol and such, because the fact that they roast that with mesquite wood, with sometimes I think even palo verde wood and things like that. These woods that you do not find in whiskey for the most part.
I often
um,
get like a roasted poblano pepper note from a mezcal.
Very much so, yeah. So yeah,
Some of
no,
them go kind of asparagus. Apparently, agave itself is a relative of asparagus. Go figure.
it is, yeah.
But
I love
anyway,
it.
we've gone way off topic at this point.
We've gotten way
So
off topic right
let's talk
here.
about Cutwater. So
Yeah, so let's talk
Cutwater,
about water for a minute.
yeah, we did the tour. We tried. So I had the rum at the bar. We tried the tequila and mezcal on the tour. Ended up taking home a bottle of the tequila añejo. Um, and then also got just the tiniest sip of the American single malt because it didn't fit into the tasting things that I wanted to do, and I didn't want to order like a whole shot of it at the bar. So I was just like, "Can I please? I'm really thinking about buying this. Can I please just have a little taste?" So they did let me have just a tiny taste of the. So as not to break any rules, right? They were just like, "Here, have a sip." It reminded me in a way of the sort of beer-oriented craft American single malts. In fact, like not necessarily. I love Westward, right? Westward definitely sticks with me as a profile. And the first thing I thought was like, not that this tastes the same as Westward, but it's adjacent, and it would be really cool to compare them. So I bought a bottle of this American single malt. Did like it was in a box. Brought it home. So here's where the trouble starts. I got home, and like in all fair, let me just precede this story by saying, in all fairness, Cutwater and AB InBev, which they're owned by Anheuser-Busch, right? Cutwater is owned by AB InBev, which is the new name for Anheuser-Busch. If you don't know, they had some merger. So just preceding this story, they made it right. But I feel I must tell this story anyway. So I got this bottle. I took it home. You know what? I'm not going to pick it up because I have pictures. I actually want to let it settle out and see what happens. Oh, I've already taken a 2-ounce sample. Never mind. It's not going to be worth showing on screen. Anyway, so I have a bottle of Cutwater Batch 14. It So I left it on my floor for like 3 weeks because I didn't have a chance to open it up and taste it. Right. It was like I got back from that trip, and then it was dry week, and then we had I think we had Caitlin on right after that, and then it was like just busy times, and so I didn't get around to drinking it at all for like 3 weeks. So I took it out, opened it up, poured a glass, and went, "Wow, that's weak for 46%."
Uh-huh.
Yes, 46% alcohol. Right. That's a super. Why is that so weak? That doesn't taste anything at all like what I had at the distillery. And then I look closer at the bottle and I see that it's super cloudy. Like
Oh.
there's an obvious haze in the bottle. Let me see if actually, can you go on the Discord and see if you can find a picture of the hazy one?
Yeah, let me check. What do you remember a good keyword for me to look up right here?
Cloudy, flawed.
Beautiful.
I used words like that, right? So doesn't taste anything at all like what I thought.
Yep.
Tastes weak, is cloudy. This and also it's not because it was cold, because it was sitting on the floor next to my whiskey cabinet for 3 weeks, undisturbed, at room temperature, 70 to 71 degrees, right? Like totally reasonable storage conditions for a whiskey. So my assessment here was like this, and I have a pretty good sense memory, and I'm pretty good at tasting things. So like I was pretty nearly convinced this is not actually what I tasted at the distillery. One way or another, somehow. So I immediately sent an Instagram post to Cutwater, and they opened up a support ticket for me. They told me to call this number, give them this give them this case number. It turned out to be Anheuser-Busch customer service support, whatever, that they had that answered. And I described like, hey, yeah, I bought this bottle at the Cutwater Distillery, and had a taste while I was there, and got it home and opened it up and had a taste. It doesn't taste anything like what it did. It looks like the liquid in the bottle is flawed, like maybe the ABV dropped and it got cloudy, or maybe there was some other flaw with this batch. I don't know. And basically was like, yeah, like I would like a replacement for because I bought this $90 bottle of whiskey, which was heavily discounted, right? Like I think out the door I paid about $50 after taxes and all, because it was like, you went on the tour, you get a discount. They had it on sale anyway for some reason. So I ended up paying like $45-50 out the door. But it was like sticker price was like $90, $89.99, something like that. So I told them that. I gave them all the details from my receipt, and they said, great, we're going to refund you the original price of that bottle, so that we can't send you a bottle, but we want you to be able to buy that bottle if you see it in a store. Right? So they gave me the full price of the bottle as a refund, which is more than making me whole. Very much appreciated that. And the happy conclusion to this story is a friend who, for legal reasons I will not name, and I will not identify how this bottle came into my possession, but a friend of mine was able to acquire and get this bottle to me, which was an earlier batch 8. And so that's what I have here. Oops. Yeah, that was no need to show Octomore at this moment. So this one is batch 8. It's the same. I don't know how different in age it is, because there's no like laser etched code on this bottle or anything like that. It doesn't have a year, nothing like that. I have no idea how to tell how different batch 8 and batch 14 are. I don't know if batch 14 is the one that has a problem. But the liquid in this bottle is perfectly clear. You can see, I mean, the bottle is like a weird shape, so it does this weird refracting thing, but like you can see clearly the stuff on the other side of the bottle, which was not the case with the other bottle. This bottle tastes like it's supposed to. It's quite good. It does, in fact, still remind me of Westward. And the really interesting thing about this bottle is that they make it on a column still. This is an American single malt made on a column still by a relatively large distillery whose specialty is not craft spirits, right? It's not, or I mean, kind of, I guess, but like their specialty is not making it, their reason for existing is not to make the best possible quality craft spirits, right? They're building spirits that go into canned cocktails. The American single malt is not one of those. But they out of a column still, they managed to get a really reasonable quality American single malt. I'm actually quite impressed, notwithstanding the Somehow I got a flawed bottle. That happens, right? Like, so this is the lesson for you, right? Like, if you have a reason to believe that the whiskey that you bought is not the same quality as what you thought you were buying, and you have a good reason to believe that, you should absolutely reach out for help, because chances are that's not what's supposed to be in that bottle. Something happened, and they can probably make it right. And to the great credit of Cutwater and Anheuser-Busch, they did in fact make it right for me. And I can't ask for anything more than that. So I am not going to rate the flawed bottle. There's no reason for me to. I'm instead going to rate the good quality bottle that I got as a replacement. And I will say that like it's a solid like 6 out of 10, which is, I mean, like if you're not familiar with my rating system, 5 out of 10 is good whiskey that's worth tasting. It's average. Anything higher than that, yeah, right? Like anything higher than that is they're doing something right. They're doing something better than you'd expect. They're doing something above average, right? 6 out of 10, maybe even 6 plus out of 10, right? Like getting close, but not quite a 7. Pretty good rating. Like considering that I went in there assuming that it would be really not very good, they did end up impressing me. By the way, your camera seems frozen and I'm hearing a lot of thumping.
Ooh, interesting. I'm sitting on a very, very old chair that I found somewhere. So that might be the thumping and the whatnot, but I do not know why. Is my camera still frozen right here?
You're good. You're back.
Oh, beautiful. Excellent. Most wonderful.
Yeah, cool. So we've spent way too long talking about my distillery visits. I'm going to do write-ups. Hopefully that'll be more digestible for people.
Sure, yeah.
Let's get into talking about our so-called main topic of today, which we've only got nominally 20 minutes left in the stream, so we might have to kind of rapid fire.
So yeah, no, do me a favor right here, Doug. You were talking about that Octomore a little bit. Do you want to pour some of that Octomore, or do you just want to talk about it for a minute?
There's other things I'd like to pour first. Let's put it that way. So let's talk about the other stuff.
Then. Let's talk about the other stuff. Right. So we were talking about Takai earlier in the stream. We were talking about what was it? Was it Cedar Ridge Takai finished whiskey?
Correct.
Yeah. So Doug, what do you know about Takai?
I know that I've had the wine at a nice steakhouse. It is, if I'm not mistaken, another one of those noble rot wines. It's from Hungary.
Yeah.
And it was quite good. I love Sauterne from Bordeaux.
Mm-hmm.
But Takai might have been better.
I think it is. So one of the biggest differences is that Sauternes, just south of the Medoc, right near Bordeaux, is going to be different grapes. It's primarily going to be Semillon, as it were. Let's see. Takai is primarily, I believe, Furmint and Harschlevelu, if I pronounce that correctly, which I probably
can you message me those names so I'll put them in the notes for the video for our watchers? Yeah, spelling French grapes is hard.
These ones are Hungarian grapes.
Oh, there you go. Even harder. I have no idea how to spell it.
I believe that would be pronounced Harschlevelu, but do not fucking quote me on that. So these are some of the primary grapes over in Hungary. They make some amazing dry wines as well. They have a much higher, in my opinion, degree of, in some cases, minerality, but in a lot of cases, herbaceousness than do the wines coming out of Sauternes and things like that, which leads to these very, very rich wines. The noble rot increases the amount of sugar inside there. But for a lot of intents and purposes, for whiskey aging and things like that, the Takai barrels are going to perform very, very similarly to Sauternes barrels, which are themselves a very classic style of aging. Yeah, no, we have some similar stuff right here, as it were. Only difference is yours has Pinot de Chiron, which we can talk about as well.
I would like to talk about the difference there. So we're talking about Sauternes and Tokai. So how does Pinot de Chiron compare?
Right. So Pinot de Chiron is going to be very, very different in a couple of ways. So when we're talking about Sauternes and Tokai, we're talking about a sweet dessert wine, very thick, very rich, golden in color quite often. Some of the only wines that are truly gold, as it were. But when we're getting over into Pinot de Chiron, once again, a beautiful barrel for aging for finishing whiskey in on account of its sweetness, on account of its richness. But the thing about Pinot de Charon, very, very popular fortified wine from over in France. Pinot de Charon is most often made right around the Cognac region. So you're getting a lot of Onier Blanc grapes. These are grapes that are very widely grown, but you don't usually see them in wine and things like that because they're most often turned into brandy. Now, with Pinot de Charon, there are a couple ways that you can make it, but the primary way is you are going to take, in many cases, unfermented grape juice, and you're going to mix it with unaged grape brandy, and then you're going to age that mixture together. So you have this very high sweetness, but you are not getting quite so sort of incredibly high sweetness as you might get from a Pedro Jimenez or a port wine. Pinot de Charon is a very lovely after dinner drink as well as an aperitif over in France. Its sister actually is another absolutely gorgeous fortified liqueur of sorts called Pommeau from up in Normandy. Same
Oh,
process, but you use apple wine and apple juice to create it. Both of these get a little bit funky,
okay.
but they have these incredibly deep, rich flavors. They're getting a little bit more popular here and there to age your whiskeys in. As we can see right here, at Del Bac, we got a few. No, this isn't actually one. I don't have the last year's fall right now. But your bottle over there is going to be a blend of Sauternes cask and Pinot de Charon casks,
Yep.
both of which
And
will yield a very, very different flavor.
yeah, and for the people listening and not watching, so you don't know what I held up. I was
Oh,
holding up
yes,
the
sorry.
Lost Lantern Lost Lantern Desert Dessert, which is a Delbach, which is entirely or partly aged in a blend or a mix of, sorry, how do you say this? Was aged separately in Sauterne
Mhm.
and Pinot de Charon casks and then blended together. Two casks, right? That the specialty
Two
series
casks.
from Lost Lantern, the single distillery series, was two casks each. And so Desert Dessert, those words are very, that's a tongue twister.
Yeah.
Desert Dessert is two barrels, one of which was Sauterne, one of which was Pinot de Charon. I have also with me a bourbon from Driftless Glen, cask
Ooh.
selection, which is a Pinot de Charon finish, which is
Yeah.
this is an R bourbon cask pick. Uh, I have tasted this one, but I've only had a sip. So with the contrast of that uh, desert dessert, I figured now would be a good time to sort of do a little side by side and see if I can pick out the influence of the Pinot de Charon on a whiskey.
Because the Pinot de Charon is going to react very differently with mesquite smoked whiskey than with a bourbon. I'm actually quite interested to see how this turns out.
Yeah, by the way, just now you may have seen me make a face. I've had
Yeah.
this. I essentially shared this with nobody, so I've had this much of this whiskey on my own, which is like that's really
Yeah.
making a dent in it. Consider I got this about 3 or 4 months ago.
Sure.
I keep coming back to this one. Really like it. Um, I have not yet gotten the note that I just got on there, which was like the mesquite version of the Lafroig Band-Aid note, if that
Oh,
makes
yeah.
sense.
It's almost tobacco-esque, I would say.
I have so little
It's really
experience with
something.
anything adjacent to tobacco that I wouldn't be able to.
Understandable. Back in Virginia, sometimes you would see like curing tobacco and things like that people were still doing around. So it's a little bit like that.
It's got like a torched orange peel thing to it also, but like a
Mm.
bitter orange. Okay, so
Yeah.
the Driftless Glen Pinot cask, not Pinot Noir, but Pinot de Charon. Yeah, see, the problem here is that one is an American single malt in used barrels, and one is a bourbon finished in a wine cask. It is
Yeah.
way oakier. So, unfortunately, I think I would need a contrast of a regular bourbon, and I don't really want to
That's
get into that
fair.
right now. So, like,
Yeah, sure.
I don't know, I don't know that I could give real impressions here. But what I recall from when I did have this next to a bourbon is that it is sweet and mineralic, and I really like
Yeah.
that.
There is a certain funk that Pinot de Charente carries, not in the same way that a rum or a beer might have a funk. It's the funk of the grapes that they're using right inside there, because these grapes are not what we're used to in consuming. If you're ever interested in seeing a little bit about that, I believe that Trader Joe's has an unfermented Chardonnay, sparkling Chardonnay grape juice this time of year. That is very, very different from pretty much every other grape juice that you're going to try. Wine grapes are just
Yeah,
not
that
what
sounds
we're
great.
used to consuming. It's very good. I really like it. But yeah, wine grapes are just not what we're used to consuming. So there's this little bit of funk in there, and in some cases a little bit of nuttiness too that you'll get out of Pinot de Charente. But I'm really interested to see what people are doing with it. It's a somewhat rarer style. The only ones that I know for certain are the Driftless Glen that you showed us, and High West did a Pinot de Charente finish at some point that I've heard was very good, but did not get to taste myself.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's continue down the realm of, and maybe these aren't terribly unusual, but as you just pointed out, there's not a whole lot of distilleries that are using those types of finishes.
Yeah.
Sauterne definitely is more common. Tokai is a bit of a trend recently, especially in Scotch.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, the Pinot de Charente is a bit of a trend now, but it's not as popular.
Mhm.
Now, here's another wine, if I'm not mistaken, that does seem to be a lot more uncommon. Here
Yeah.
I have Port Charlotte Cask Exploration 16. I could really embarrass myself by trying to read the Gallic on here.
Hey. See.
Aged 10 years, cask type Banyuls.
Oh, okay. Banyuls. What do you know about Banyuls?
It wouldn't be accurate to say I know even more than nothing.
Bonjour, I think, is the technical one.
Okay, all right. I know very, very little.
Right. So
I almost
Bonjour-
dropped my Glencairn directly on the ground.
that would have been awful. So Bonjour, let me see about. I don't know. This one is a much rarer style just in America in general. The wine itself. So let's see. So Bonjour is a fortified style of wine from over in France, down in Roussillon, if I remember correctly. Roussillon. So this is going to be southern France, out near Catalonia in Spain, Catalunya. So it is going to be somewhat similar to the port style of wine, where you actually put in you start fermenting a wine. You do not get it fully fermented. There's still sugar inside there. You add spirit, usually brandy, back in to halt the fermentation. This is how port is made. This is how some of your sweeter fortified wines are made. Notably, this is not how a lot of sweeter sherries are made. Cream sherry will usually have some sugar or sweetness added after the fact, as it were. But that's a whole other conversation right there. Bonjour is going to be, let me see, what are the grapes that
I'll
they use
just
in Bonjour?
show off the bottle here for a second.
Yeah.
It's a
Bonjour
very nice
is
looking bottle.
generally going to be using things like Carignan, these very lovely red grapes, Grenache Blanc, a white form of the Grenache grape, Grenache Gris, a similar one to that, Grenache Noir, the classic Grenache grape, Macabeu, Malvoisie, and Muscat, all of which are a little bit sweeter in some cases, but that gets into a little more complicated stuff right there. But this is something that you rarely see here in the United States, much less in the form of an aging. So how does that taste, Demi?
Yeah. So, of course, saying we don't see this much in the United States, this is no exception. This is a Scotch from Islay, right? This is Port Charlotte from Bruichladdich. And they are known for doing things with weird and unusual wine casks, and most often blending those together. So getting a single cask Port Charlotte is kind of a rare treat, because most of your Port Charlotte releases, even the annual Port Charlotte Islay Barley named after the vintage year, my favorite being Port Charlotte Islay Barley 2011.
Fair enough. Okay.
Even those are often a blend of a couple of dozen casks from 7 or 8 different types of previously used wood, several wines, maybe some ex-bourbon, maybe some ex-sherry, that sort of thing. And Port Charlotte is probably my favorite expression from Islay. You okay there?
Just stuck that whiskey in my nose.
Should I give you a minute?
No, no, I'm good. It's all fine. It's all good. I watered it down first.
On purpose?
Oh, yeah. So it's very painful if you get whiskey up your nose. Turns out that your the sensory organs and the little stuff in your nose a lot more sensitive than your mouth. Burns a lot. Don't
Mm-hmm.
do that, as it were.
It's happened to many
Just
of us, I
general
think.
suggestions, I suppose.
All right, yeah. How's this taste? So on the hands and the nose, it is for sure Port Charlotte, right? Like it's got that heavy but not overwhelming peat smoke. It's got an earthiness. It has that minerality that I associate with dessert wine. So sort of no surprises so far. I'm just gonna put that up on screen and not comment on
Yeah,
it.
it's more whiskey note. Go on.
So apparently we commented on it. Um, it almost has a chalky quality to it, but not the way that like a cloudy sake is chalky,
Mhm.
but more like grape must, I guess.
Okay, okay.
But like also like a little bit of like sweet tarts on the nose.
Okay, okay. See, okay, that is related to the chalkiness almost, I guess. Yeah. Um, Tell
On the
me, what
palate,
do you?
it's a little funky, but like
Yeah,
otherwise, it reads the way I would expect it to. Right, the nose and the palate are pretty synced up.
yeah. So when we're talking about funk, what do you? This is a somewhat transition into another sort of slightly exotic cask that we've been seeing a lot more of these days. What do you know about Madeira, Demi?
Uh, Aside from that, it comes from the, if I'm not mistaken, French Isle of Madeira.
Portuguese.
Sorry, Portuguese. There you go. Right. Of course, I make
Um,
mistakes. Um,
nah,
so yeah, Portuguese. It's off the coast of North Africa, if I'm not mistaken.
yep, right off the coast of about 300 miles off the coast of Morocco, if memory serves.
So pretty equatorial region, but
Very much.
otherwise, my impression is that it is pretty similar to port or sherry.
Yeah, so this is going to be a pretty similar is a good way to describe it. So Bonnier has a something very much in common with Madeira, insofar is that sometimes Bonnier is actually set out either in oak barrels or in glass bottles exposed to the sun, allowing it to, and I quote, Maderize. This is essentially heat shocking the wine. This is something that is done quite often in Madeira because back in the day the best Madeira would be found in the United States or the colonies at the time. This is because the Madeira that would be sent over there would be popped into barrels and then be taken across the Atlantic, and it would get significantly better over that voyage. Now, this wine at this point would be what we might term as heat shocked. It is exposed to heat. It is exposed to oxidation. It is things are done to it that you do not want to do to a wine. This creates a much more long lasting wine. Madeira is sometimes known, you can still buy bottles of it for several $1,000s from the 1880s, as it were. And it is allegedly drinkable. Take that as you will.
Allegedly.
But Madeira itself has a very distinct burnt character to it, almost like a burnt caramel. You find some of this inside your whiskeys that are aged with Madeira. This is, once again, somewhat not the most common thing in the world, but a somewhat more popular thing these days to be finishing your whiskey. And I believe that Bunnahabhain has done a Madeira cask finish. I believe you'll find a few American whiskey brands that have done Madeira cask finishes, and those can turn out very, very well, as it were.
So my local whiskey group has done. I have hosted a sherry horizontal, which I
Mm,
intend to do on stream once I'm somehow able to get samples to you guys. The sort of 6 different styles of sherry. I couldn't find a Palo Cortado. I would like to before we do that tasting, but we'll see. It
I
just it's
might have one.
so hard to buy like specialty wine even at something like a Total Wine. Like just
Sherry
yeah.
is even harder because it's fallen greatly out of favor in the general populace.
Yep. So there was unfortunately, there was a liquor store going out of business, Bob's Liquors from Seattle,
Ah,
that like in their closeout sale, they were selling off all of their sherry, and they actually had a pretty decent selection of sherry. So I got one of every style that they had, and did a half dozen, right, sherry tasting. The other
sure.
thing that my group has done is sort of collected a bunch of Madeiras from various auctions and other sources, and did a
Ooh.
tasting of I believe it was 8 different Madeiras of 3 or 4 different varieties.
Mhm.
So I actually have had a fair amount of exposure to the wine itself.
It's a
And
beautiful wine, one of my favorites.
also, we coordinated a set of samples, eight, somewhere between 8 and 12 different expressions of Madeira finished Scotch, which I
Okay,
have. I mean, that's a lot to do in even one side by side
a
tasting.
lot.
So it would have to be several. And I haven't gotten around to it because I got that set of them around the time I moved, and they ended up in the back of a closet. So that's what happens. I need to get back around to that because I think that's going to be really interesting. I'll let you know when those reviews are up if I ever get back around to posting reviews. You guys need to remind me to post reviews.
I will do so.
It's very easy to get distracted doing the podcast.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's see.
there's one more. I've never seen this wine finish before. I've never
Okay.
heard of this wine.
Okay.
This is really, really good stuff.
Okay.
Um, first of all, let's do something a little less weird. I have a
Okay.
Woodinville finished in Muscatel casks. This was
Oh,
the
beautiful. Yeah.
2021 harvest cask. This is, I think, to date, the best Woodinville whiskey I've ever had.
A Muscatel finished whiskey is the best one. That's okay. I'm okay. I'm down.
It's really good.
I think my favorite was the port finished myself.
The port finished is like so this one is a cask. No, it's not. It's 50%.
Oh,
But what I
port finished is one of
find,
their more basic releases, I believe.
the port is one of the more basics, but you can get it at the distillery in a cask strength variety.
Ooh.
What I have learned from, and I live near Woodinville. I actually used to live in Woodinville. Hold on, what year is it? 10 years ago, I
It's
lived in Woodinville.
2023 right now.
In 10 years, I lived in
How you
Woodinville.
doing, Rip Van Winkle?
Um, well, I haven't fallen asleep for 20 years yet. So, but ask me again when I'm 40 or 50.
Fair enough.
So yeah, this is it says Muscatel finished straight bourbon whiskey finished in 10-year-old Muscatel de Setúbal pipes.
Ooh.
So this one, yeah, okay. So anyway, the port, okay, what was I talking about?
Talking about
Wooden
Muscatel finished Woodinville.
Woodinville whiskey, I think, most of the time does better at cask strength than it does at their standard proof of 90 proof, 45% alcohol.
Really? Okay.
I think that
Okay.
Woodinville, and most of the time I rate Woodinville on flavor really well, but I almost always complain about the burn. And I think Woodinville is a great example of how adding water to whiskey can sometimes make it burn more because the cask strength releases tend not to have that burn, or at least it's no worse. Ooh.
I was going to ask because I've never. All right. So this is a great thing to talk about. Who's that? Pawn?
Yep. That's Pond.
Pawn just said Writer's Tears and Inniskillen ice wine cask. So Inniskillen, if I remember correctly, is a Canadian ice wine maker. I really enjoy their stuff. It is like drinking sugar. It's very good.
It's
It
delicious
is
and complex sugar though. It's really
complex
good
sugar.
stuff.
Incredibly excellent ice wine, notable for being a type of wine where you allow the grapes to freeze during the first frost of the year. This is going to make it so that the actual sugar, very, very sugary bits of the grape are going to actually melt first when you're pressing it. So you're going to get a much, much more intensely sweet juice, concentrated juice out of these grapes. Now, I actually have never seen an ice wine whiskey finish before because, to my knowledge, I do not believe that you generally rest ice wine in oak or anything like that. Take that as you will. That is kind of dependent.
Huh.
Sometimes, a lot of
That's a
times,
really
I've
good
seen it
point.
rested in stainless steel and such.
That might be one of those cases where they took a cask and seasoned it with ice wine for the purpose
Could
of
have
using
been.
it for whiskey.
Could have been, yeah.
We can
That would be
talk
a
about
somewhat
the
expensive seasoning. Yeah.
we can talk about that trend in the industry and whether or not that is integrity by some definition. But I personally have no problem with it because what matters is that you get a delicious product out the other end.
Yeah, what matters is the flavor, I think. If it creates some good flavor, if it's not doing things that are really weird, then I am okay with it. But as you were saying, Pawn, very raw grape. Yeah, no, ice wine. You're going to get some grape flavors in that shit. It is going to be very intense. I would love to try this. Writer's Tears as well. My personal favorite whiskeys that you can just find out there on the market pretty regularly. Big fan of Writer's Tears. I think they've got a cask strength Writer's Tears at my local Total Wine. I should probably get that at some point. But yeah, no, that is a particularly fascinating one right there.
So anyway, back on. Let me just wrap up the Woodenville thing. So I
Yeah,
brought out this
totally.
bottle. I managed to get. Yeah, I managed to get bottle number 99. So like double digit bottles still, and got that signed by the distiller team. So naturally, I bought another bottle that I could actually. Naturally, I bought another bottle that I could actually open and drink, and that's this one. Of course, I'm gonna end up opening that one anyway because the signatures are cool, but keeping that in a sealed bottle is stupid because whiskey is meant to be drank, right? Open your
Yeah.
whiskey, drink your whiskey, right? But so I wouldn't
Put
have to
more
right
Woodenville
away.
in it.
I got this one. So the reason I brought out this Woodenville Harvest release is because this was one of my favorite releases from Woodenville, period. And I was there at the release party, and I bought this and the PX and the Oloroso that they had from earlier in that same year. I haven't been physically to Woodenville Whiskey Distillery since then, but a friend went and split out the bottles of this year's Harvest release, and we are talking, of course, about the holiday releases. So the Harvest release feels appropriate, right? And this year's Harvest release, and this is the cask strength version of it, which isn't that much higher than 50% to begin with, which could be why the 50% doesn't bother me on the heat. Because it's pretty close. This is Woodenville Whiskey Bourbon 2023 Harvest Release, Portuguese Ginhinha cask. I don't know how to pronounce that. Ginjinha. So this is a wine I never heard of or tasted before.
This is something I'm not familiar with.
Or a type of wood, perhaps.
Portuguese liqueur made by infusing ginja berries, a form of morello cherry, apparently, in alcohol.
Yeah, there you go. So it's not a wine; it's a liqueur. Okay.
Hmm.
This is very cool stuff. It's woody in a way that you've never experienced before. It's pungent,
Really?
but like it has that sweet fruitiness to it, and the bourbon plays really nice with that. So I thought that was a segue out of, or a segue from or within wine, but I guess this is the first one we're talking about that isn't a wine. As long as we're talking about stuff that isn't wine, tell us about your experiment with Amberana.
All right. So, Doug, what do you know about Amberana? We talked about it earlier this week.
Well, I guess I looked it up, so I'm cheating a little bit. It is a legume.
It is a legume. It's not an oak. It's a strange legume tree. Hasn't killed me yet, so good going there. Amberana it is described as and I quote, rare South American wood. Most of these barrels or chips or bits and pieces are coming from Brazil, so far as I gather. Now, it is generally, from what I've seen, referred to as a rare wood. The thing is, it's getting to be everywhere very quickly. My first exposure to it was Doc Swinson's exploratory cask, their Bossa Nova cask earlier this year. Now, I really like Doc Swinson's bourbon and rye. This was one of my favorites. So the thing about Amberana is that, so I have a bottle of it right here. This is fairly depleted because a lot of other people also really like this. This is the Barrel Bourbon Amberana Cask Finish series. This is excellent. It's a really good one. I believe it is sitting about 58.21% alcohol. It has some very distinct kind of cinnamon notes to it, some very baking spice, a little bit more sweetness than you expect out of your basic oak finish. Now, this jar that I have right here to the side is mostly gone because it's also incredibly good. This is something that I just did this week and such. This one is a 60% wheat whiskey, 100% wheat whiskey from Dry Fly in this case. Just had this kind of hanging around, figured I'd try something out with it. I popped about 3 chips of Amberana wood into this jar, along with a little, I believe, 10 milliliter pour of Pedro Jimenez sherry. And it came out about 10 hours later, a little bit interesting, a little bit it changed the flavor a lot. So I've let it sit for a little bit longer. I've been trying it throughout. I left, you can't really see this in the thing, but I left the tiniest little chip inside here to see if this would sort of evolve and change. Now, when we're talking about Amberana wood, we are talking primarily about spiciness. Not always the baking spiciness or the spiciness that you get from a rye or something like that. This is like walking into a Cinnabon or a Panera or something like that. It is sweet. It is in your face. It is like pumpkin pie spice. It is very, very interesting. Very much stronger on some things like nutmeg, a little bit of licorice even on the back end of this particular one. But this one also, and I don't know why it did this one got some very, very distinct coffee and toffee and chocolate notes to it as well. I think this turned out unreasonably good for a random test, quite honestly. It is sweet. It is easily drinkable, especially, I don't really know what the percentage is right now, probably 59% or something like that at this point. Legally, I do not believe that this would be considered a whiskey as it were, since I put some Pedro Jimenez in it, but
but you're doing an experiment where
it's an experiment.
are like, if you had put that in a wet barrel of PX, an Amberana barrel that was wet with PX for somehow, that you're kind of simulating that going on,
exactly
right?
what I was kind of going for right there.
How much do you think the PX is contributing to that?
The PX is contributing only a very slight amount towards the very end. There is some raisin notes to this at the very end. It almost tastes like you're eating a morning bun or something like that. A little bit of raisin, a lot of spice, a little bit of icing sugar is what I primarily get out of it. On the nose, at the very least. On the palate, those raisin notes come out, but it's a lot drier than what you would expect from a PX finish. You get a lot more. It's so strange because it's a very, very woody influence, because I just popped some straight chips into this thing, but it is not oak. It is a very different style. It's almost a little bit greener, a little bit fresher style of wood, but not quite raw in flavor, I would call it. This, I think, is important just to test out and such, just sort of see what's going on. Because Amberana, I believe I was talking with Mark, our distiller over at Whiskey Del Bach the other day, and he was calling Amberana cask distiller's ketchup. People are buying a lot of Amberana casks recently. It is becoming an increasingly big thing. This is in reference to this is a weird one. This is in reference to, I believe, elderflower liqueur being bartenders' ketchup for a long time.
Okay. I thought you were about to tell me they were aging elderflower in Amberana, and I was like, huh?
No, elderflower liqueur, primarily Saint Germain's, is something you would just throw at a cocktail throughout a lot of the late 2000s and 2010s, and to make it a little bit better, a little bit fresher, a little bit more floral. So people started calling it bartender's ketchup, just because it kept showing up on menus everywhere. Now, I don't think that Amberana cask is quite so encompassing as Saint Germain's was to the cocktail industry for so long, but it's really getting up there. You're seeing a lot of people buying up Amberana casks or buying up aging things for Amberana, either pieces of the wood or chips or things like that. I believe that actually at Del Bac, we were just sent a big giant bag of it from the Northwest Barrel Company just for us to try it out. To see if we liked it and such. And they're leaning in really hard to it. It really changes your whiskey.
Okay, so is
It
that
brings
in any way an official or unofficial statement that there may be an Amberana Del Bac coming?
no, not nothing like that right now. When I
But
was
just
on the
so
West,
everybody knows, like there's really not necessarily any significance to the fact that he's talked about this because
no,
distillers experiment with stuff all the time and it's not a thing until it's a thing.
yeah, this is not something, and I won't speak too much for Mark right now. This is not something that Mark is incredibly interested in,
Mm,
primarily on account of the fact that a lot of people are also jumping in on this bandwagon. And from what I can gather, he feels like if we did it right now, we might be a little bit too late, honestly, by the time we would get out a whiskey to the market, honestly. That would be years
yeah.
from now, as it were.
What I've been
Um,
hearing from people is that like the people are kind of Amberana out now, right? It was a trend.
a
Everybody did
little
it.
bit.
People are kind of tired of tasting stuff that's been in Amberana because
That
it's
is the
kind of
thing.
overpowering.
And oh my gosh, yeah, no, 10 day or 10 hours with three chips inside a jar. Now, to be fair, this is a 375 milliliter jar or something like that. So I mean, like, this is a very fast extraction. But 10 hours, and it is unrecognizable almost to its previous state as just 100% wheat whiskey aged in oak. But the thing about it is that the flavors that I got from this are not that far off from the flavors that I got from the Amberana bourbon. The primary difference is actually a lot of that wheat influence from the whiskey itself. A lot of the other, and the PX that I added in a little bit, a lot of the other flavors are very similar. Now, this isn't to say that it's a bad thing to age in. It creates some really excellent flavors, but there is not, to my experience yet, a lot of fungibility to the Amberana. You don't from what I can tell this far, you don't put two things into Amarana casks and get out two wildly different whiskeys that are really fascinating, like you do for even those bourbons that you were talking about earlier, the Heaven and Hell series, where you just pop it into oak and it comes out like fascinatingly different. There's a reason, I suppose, that oak is the wood for aging for centuries. It is a fascinating wood to experiment with. It is a fascinating wood to use, and I do not think that Amberana will be taking its place anytime soon. But I think that it's a thing that people are kind of thinking a little bit about, because we're looking down some pretty big oak shortages in the next while at this point. But that's another conversation right there that we really probably should touch on at some point in the future. But that's a whole thing right there.
Yep. Refilled oak. And
Mhm.
so as long as if we're still having fun, we can keep going.
Yeah, totally.
But I probably want to wrap it up in about 15 minutes. Um,
I've got about 15 minutes of whiskey in my glass. I'd say that.
fair enough. All right. It is pear brandy season at Clear Creek.
Pear brandy season, baby.
So naturally, I have to bring this guy out.
Oh,
You've never seen a pear brandy from Clear Creek aged because this
no.
isn't Clear Creek's brandy.
Hmm?
Bait and switch.
Oh, wait, this is. Oh, okay.
This is my Clear Creek pear brandy aged in a rye cask of my own. Hold on. Real quick, switch my camera because I have a wider view. You see that cask in the corner there?
Yeah.
That is a cask that I've been messing around with for about 3 years now. And I think the best thing that has ever come out of that cask was potentially this, or things that have come out after this, because the pear brandy, as Caitlin was talking about, you could distill it like vodka and it still tastes like pear. The pear flavor is extremely sticky. It does not want to go away. For 3 generations of stuff out of my cask, it still tastes like pear, at least a little bit. So this one right here, if you're not familiar with Clear Creek pear brandy, it is Bartlett pear. I guess you would say Poir Williams, but by a different name, right? Because it's Bartlett pears. Um, So the unaged pear eau de vie, let's say, tastes like the whole pear, skin and all, with the texture of the flesh and all that is remarkable. It tastes
Mm.
like pear, but to say that is overly simplistic because it tastes like eating a pear, but it's alcohol. And it's great in cocktails. It's great in a lot of things. Even so, because I'm a whiskey nerd, I felt like it needed some wood. And so I decided to experiment with this, and I had this cask over here. I had rye whiskey in, and after that, I was like, well, what do I want to taste like rye? And I sort of asked around the internet and ended up coming up with, yeah, I should put pear brandy in that cask. And the pear brandy that I had access to was Clear Creek pear brandy. This ended up coming out tasting like an Italian pear tart.
Oh.
So it's got sort of holiday baking spices, and it's got a little bit of a breadiness, and it's got that sort of cooked pear kind of quality to it for having had.
Mm. Stewed or baked, or what are we talking here? Caramelized?
Well, baked, I would say, because of the whole pear tart thing. That's the thing I would
Yeah.
evoke. It's not like poached pears,
Hmm.
because that's a thing. That's a tasting note that you get sometimes. It's not
Oh
all the
yeah.
way there. It's definitely more pear baked into a pie.
Mm.
And
That's
it's
excellent.
absolutely delicious. And I shared this with Joe, and Joe shared it with Caitlin, and Caitlin forgot. So I brought Caitlin another sample because I needed her to remember. Um, and then this is probably I shouldn't mention it.
Don't do it. I don't know what you're about to say, but don't do it, Demi.
I'm not gonna mention it.
Okay. Thank God.
But well, now I would just be giving it away.
Yeah, you would.
We're just gonna move on.
There are things that we cannot speak of.
But anyway, yeah, the pear brandy.
Anyway.
Why I said things about pear
Yeah.
brandy. Um, so this right here, Scarabus, is just your basic Isla generic brand, whatever, from Douglas Lang.
Oh, Lang. Okay.
But which one? Hunter Lang. Sorry.
Hunter.
Um,
Okay. That's, yeah.
so and this one here was what I put into the cask after the pear brandy, and this was a pretty boring, smoky single malt to start with.
Sure.
But what came out of my cask was amazing
Yeah. Okay.
because it has like an
I'm very fascinated.
estery pear and baking spices, and this may actually be the best thing that has come out of my barrel.
I do love a good estery Isla Scotch, quite honestly. This is one of those things that I really found out because this is really one of my first times experimenting with whiskey and things like that in my strange little experiments, quite honestly. I've
Oh,
made one of,
by the
oh,
way,
okay. Yeah, go on.
sorry, before we move on, because I think we're going to depart probably very quickly from this topic.
Yeah, totally.
Actually, one of the videos on my YouTube channel is me emptying that pear brandy out of the barrel and refilling it with Scarabus. That was the first time, probably the only time, I've actually recorded video of that process. I think it's pretty cool. It's not a very good video, but like, if you can put up with the bad audio quality and the fact that it's not edited at all, and the fact that the person I was talking to on Discord at the time fell asleep in the middle of me doing it, because he's in England and it was like 4 a.m. or something for him at the time. Um, it's fun to watch the process, I think, of emptying that barrel and refilling it. And I also give tasting notes about this one right here. So, um, oh, this glass has a chip out of it. I might have to retire this glass. Oh well.
Oh, no.
Anyway, what you were saying. Back
Right.
to you.
So I've done a lot of strange little experiments, but the only one before this strange jar, what with the amberana and the what all, was one of my favorite things that I've ever done. A fat washed bourbon. I believe it was a High West's Prairie bourbon that I fat washed with buffalo butter. Absolutely amazing if you can get your hands on some buffalo butter. It was kind of ice creamy in flavor almost. It was very fascinating. But it really did sort of open my eyes to the fact that really should be doing this a little bit more because you can really create some fascinating expressions at home and things like that. Yeah.
Well, okay, rapid fire. We've
Yeah,
talked
go
about
on.
Woodinville. There's probably not a lot to say on these, but I have get back to the mic. I have a few interesting Woodinville finishes here.
Okay.
Woodinville likes to do, experimental finishing stuff, and that's fun. They're not all winners. I mean, like they're all pretty good usually, right? But there's some that are excellent, some that are just pretty good. What I have here is a trio of Woodinville's. I forget which order I got these in, but I'm not sure it really matters. Toasted applewood staves finished.
Okay.
So like we're doing staves. That's pretty cool.
Big
Like a
big fan
pretty
of Applewood
subtle,
though.
pretty subtle influence on this one. I
Really?
wrote notes a while ago and I forget what I thought, so I'm gonna have to go back. I think it's on my Instagram.
I
Um,
know you said rapid fire, but do you have a favorite Applewood finished whiskey right now?
this is the only one, so I wouldn't be able
Oh,
to
fair
say.
enough. I highly suggest trying Widow Jane's Applewood finished rye. It's quite nice.
Oh wait, is the Copper Fox applewood also or cherrywood?
I believe aren't they smoked with cherry and applewood? Are they
Okay,
finished
I'm gonna
in
have
cherry and
to.
applewood?
I'm not prepared to speak on that, but I
Ooh,
will.
shit.
I'll do that side by side and report back. How about that?
Yeah, totally.
So the other one that's really cool is they took a barrel and they smoked it with applewood chips.
Mm.
So that's this one, and that was a really interesting side by side. And then as a further adjacency, they also took a barrel and smoked it with maple wood
Okay.
and used that to finish a whiskey. And that one was unremarkable, if I recall correctly.
Fair enough.
I think the applewood smoked barrel finish was the best of these three, if I recall. So there you go. That's the rapid fire on the Woodinville finishes. I have no other fun Well, I guess I've got that Octomore.
You have the Octomore. The Octomore is a conversation unto itself. That's what, 3 different wine areas that it was aged in?
Yeah. This is probably, I mean, I'll just say, right? This is, so what I have here is a sample of Octomore 14.2, again, from the local whiskey group. I have 6 whole bottles of Octomore, so I didn't need another one. But the 14 series was very interesting. The ppm count has gotten a lot higher. We're back significantly over 100 again. So this is 128.9 ppm. And the spec on this one is 40% 4 years in Oloroso, 16% Amarone first fill, and 44% Amarone second fill, followed by 1 year in Pauillac wine casks.
So what do you know about Pauillac, Doug?
Nothing at all.
Got it. Pauillac is a wine area in Bordeaux, one of the most famous ones in the world to certain people, in Bordeaux on the left bank. So we're talking primarily Cabernet Sauvignon, your classic, rich, expensive Bordeaux's, as it were. We're talking dark fruit flavors. We're talking cherry. We're talking that kind of shit with a good Pauillac. But that's a whole conversation right there itself. Along with, what was the other stuff inside there?
Oloroso and Amarone, to keep it short.
Oloroso, it's a very common whiskey aging barrel. Usually a sweeter style of sherry from Frontera de Jerez. It is very lovely. Yields some absolutely excellent nutty characteristics. Amarone, however, an area in what's the area from? Hey, you have a great night, Pawn. Thanks for sticking with us for so long, honestly. This is probably gonna be our last little bit right here, and I hope you have a wonderful reason or evening. What evening?
Reason
Right,
for the evening.
Amarone. Yeah, reason for the evening. Amarone is going to be in the is in Valpolicella. It's in Verona, in the Veneto region. So we're talking a little bit, if I remember correctly, more north in Italy, but do not quote my geography this late into the podcast. But Amarone is primarily going to be the Corvina grape. It is going to be very, very rich on account of the fact that they are generally set out to dry in the sun before they are made into a dry wine. This is somewhat unusual. Usually, wines that are set out to dry in the sun, things like there's some Greek sweet wines that are set out like that. There is some South African wines called straw wines because they're set out on straw mats and such. They're set out to do this. Amarone is going to be a dry wine, so very, very rich, somewhat raisiny in flavor. A good price for an Amarone is going to be between $40 and $60 probably. So it's not one that most people are going to have in general, or they'll have the very, very cheap Amarone della Valpolicella, which are going to be a little bit less great. But yeah.
To be fair, though, that's not obnoxious, right? Like, I'd give that a try.
No. No, yeah, it's a good $40 to $60 is a great celebration wine of some sort, something you break out for an occasion of some fashion. But yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna have to split up right after. I mean, I've had quite a few smoky things tonight already. So, but Octomore is always gonna override all that.
Hey,
But I'm
this
still
is
gonna
the
have
end
to.
of the night right now, yeah.
And somehow Octomore is always the last thing, so you're never tasting it on a clean palate, right? Like
Nah,
you've got to like dedicate your week to like I'm gonna taste Octomore and then let my palate rest, right? Like that's
yeah.
almost, or vice versa. I'm gonna let my palate rest and then taste Octomore, and then probably let your palate rest some more. Um, so teasing apart Octomore smokiness, and at this point, I think I can recognize Oloroso, and trying to find that Amarone and Pauillac, but I don't know either of those wines, so I wouldn't be able to like pull that apart.
They're also going to usually the thing with red wine barrels, especially, is that they're most often incredibly overpowering. So the fact that you're tasting that and you're saying that you pulled out the Oloroso is very interesting to me, actually.
Oh,
Before
I
anything
wasn't
else.
saying that I could. I'm saying that I think I
Oh,
should be able to.
oh, I see. Yeah, no. The thing about red wine barrels is they're very often incredibly overpowering to some of the other things.
Yeah.
Bull Run has a lovely little Pinot Noir cask, but it tastes like Pinot Noir. It's the primary thing. So yeah,
Westford does a really good job of not letting the Pinot Noir overpower.
they do,
So
don't they? I'd almost forgotten that they'd had one. I've had
it's a
that a few
really
times
good one.
before.
It is,
Yeah.
at least in the year that I bought mine, or actually was given
Mhm.
mine. Technically, it's a distillery sample. Thank you, Westward. Um, at the year that I got mine, that was definitely my favorite of their core series. Corbin Black, Sunny Dr. Black. Yes, we are still
Oh,
live.
hey there,
Thank you for
Sonny.
joining
How you
us.
doing? I'm sorry I did not tell you this was happening tonight.
Yeah,
Would have
whoops.
pinged you if I'd remembered. My apologies.
We are just about to wrap up, though. So we're probably going to have another 5 minutes or so of talking and then kind of wrap it up. But thanks for joining.
Mhm.
So on the nose, this Octomore is surprisingly dry, I would say. Like the
Mm.
Oloroso part of that doesn't surprise me, but the other wines, I expect wine cask whiskey to smell sweet at the very least.
Sure. Yeah, we're talking about some really, really dry wines, Amarone and Pauillac, though. We're talking about incredibly tannic wines, especially.
Okay, yeah, it does smell
So
tannic,
yeah,
which is a little surprising for Octomore, which is typically young and refill casks. So yeah.
yeah. So yeah, when we're talking Pauillac and we're talking Amarone, we're talking tannins on top of tannins for barrels. These are
Mhm.
incredibly tannic wines before they go into the barrels. Not nearly as much, naturally, but they are going to be very dark, very tannic from those grape skins in the first place.
This is, I would say the pungency on this is a pretty close match for that Ginginia cask as well,
Really?
which is
Hmm.
quite pungent. But I mean, somehow at the same time, less pungent than the Driftless Glen in the Pinot de Charente, which is the
Sure.
kind of pungency you get from a strong oaky bourbon, right? In a
Okay.
different way, the Ginginia is pungent, and in yet a different way, the Octomore is pungent. Yeah. Anyway,
Hmm.
man, I don't know what to say about that. I'm gonna have to spend some
How
time
does
with
the
that.
smoke interact with the barrel flavors, do you think?
I would say, as per usual, Octomore is less smoky than you would expect it to be for the ppm,
Yeah, sure.
and I think it's really well balanced. The ppm versus the smokiness versus the wine. I think, normally, I
Stop
think.
trying to eat that. Sorry.
Is there a cat we have to show?
There's hey Tig, how you doing? Oh no, you brought me. So she'll bring me this toy from across the house because she wants me to throw it for her.
Uh huh.
Yeah, so I'll do that right now. Let's see if I can't get it right over here. Oh, she's getting ready. I'm sorry. No, the cat plays fetch occasionally. If she can find that where I threw it. This room is currently in a mess because we're moving in about a week or two.
And good luck with that, by the way.
Oh, it should be fine.
All right, let's there was one minor topic that I wanted to follow up, and this is I would say this is more of a teaser of things to come for what I'm going to be focusing on in the near future.
Yeah, sure.
I have rediscovered the TTB Cola approvals public database. This is where distilleries submit their labels and you get to see what is coming. And Genji says, I wish you the best with your move.
Thank you, Genji.
I want to be keeping a closer eye on the distilleries that I know to be producing American single malt, and also hope to catch a glimpse of distilleries that might be releasing American single malt soon. Adorable. We have to zoom in. Cat must zoom in. Cat, big as you can. Actually, this one might be bigger. There you go. That's actually bigger.
She's a very chumby little creature.
Adorable.
I'll let you down.
So naturally, where'd it go? Naturally, I first of all checked the distilleries that I know and love very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a label that I didn't know existed.
Really?
Oh, you can't even see that.
Yeah, no, I know what this is. You should probably scroll down now. Let's see.
Also, I just love the verbiage of we're still not totally committing to, I mean, can't anyway, but like, we really have to explain what's in this label. This doesn't say rum barrel finished. This says rum barrel aged.
Indeed.
So we have coming soon, perhaps?
Coming soon, perhaps.
So something that happens with these labels sometimes is distilleries will submit labels for approval that they are not 100% sure they will use, just so that's not a hurdle when they get around to releasing something.
Yeah.
So this very well still could be an experiment.
This
may not ever get released, but there is at least a suggestion that there is McCarthy's aged in rum barrels, sitting and waiting to be bottled.
The ABV and other things like that are also subject to change upon actual release and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is another cool thing to look at with this label, right? That stuff on the bottom. Also, I love how this was taken. Like, this was a picture taken from a computer screen and submitted to the TTB, which is just all kinds of craft distilling loveliness. You can see the pixels.
Makes my eyes hurt.
So you can see that they have a barrel number and a bottle number and a date that has too many digits. And the 50% may very well be an accurate number. But I believe that when the TTB approves a label, certain elements of the label can be swapped out, and they would probably indicate that on the application. I would not be surprised if every one of the numbers in these white boxes at the bottom could be handwritten in or could be changed to whatever they happen to be within reason and not violate the approval of this label. So that was the only cool label that I found in an evening or two of Yeah, so that's an interesting question. How much is this going to show if I pop this up on screen? Oh, we get the whole
Dr.
comment. Okay.
Sunny Black asks, how do you get those labels without having the product? Do you provide photo evidence and documentation to prove that you're capable of a product that meets requirements of the label?
I believe that's true.
Hmm.
It's also helpful to remember that while it's a lot more lax than it used to be, right? They used to have like G-mans in the distilleries. They had the spirit safe, and like there was always a government employee supervising the production of your bonded whiskey, right? This is not a bottled and bond whiskey per se, but everything these days is produced under bond with the government in bonded facilities and so on, right? If you wanted to make a distillery, you have to be bonded, whether you release a bottled and bond whiskey or not, or spirit or not. Your alcohol production is bonded one way or another, and that means that there is a lot of paperwork and documentation that gets submitted to the government, and there's going to be a paper trail that indicates that you are capable of producing whatever it is. So this label indicates that what they're describing on the label is not a fiction, but it also doesn't mean they'll ever actually release it. So time will tell.
There's many ways that these things can sort of be taken to the side in distillation. There are varieties of things where sometimes you've got some barrels, you think you're going to release it, you taste the barrels, it's not good. You then take those barrels aside and you start blending them into other things in, say, small amounts, or doing different things with them to round out other whiskeys that you feel much, much more confident in. This is only a couple of the ways that your whiskey might not reach the market in the form that you had originally intended it to, or even if you hadn't necessarily intended it to.
By the way, there's a little fun side story with this. When I saw this label, so Joe has already moved on from Clear Creek. Joe O'Sullivan has moved on to Minden Mills Distillery, and he's doing great, but he's not ready to talk about what he's making yet. But the timeline on that 3 years means that, you know, Joe had something to do with whatever is in that label. And Caitlin, of course, would know whatever. She knows what's in the barrel house, right? I sent that label that I pulled off the TTB website to both Caitlin and Joe. And this is the very first time I have ever gotten a no comment from more than one person. And by no comment, I mean, even though I text them often and we often chat back and forth, I sent them that label and heard nothing from either of them for the entire week until I messaged them about something else. They're playing
That's
this one
great.
very close to the chest. And that's all I can say. So the extension of that is I am actually beginning to watch the TTB for American single malt labels, and I hope to be able to say interesting things about what's coming. But it turns out that following a bunch of distilleries on Instagram is probably a more efficient way to find out stuff that's coming, but you've got to be paying really close attention, and that's kind of a full-time job, which I have a full-time job already, so I'm going to miss things. If you see an interesting American single malt product coming that I haven't talked about yet, let me know. And if you want to know what I've talked about already, watch my website, demitaste.com, where I'm going to be posting write-ups of all kinds of things as soon as I get around to it. There's always more to do. And with all that, I think it is time that we wrap up our stream.
Indeed.
So I will grab my glass of the best thing to ever come out of my 2-liter barrel back there, which happens to be in a Westward
whiskey
glass.
in the jar.
There's whiskey in the jar.
Great song.
I don't know the song.
Whiskey in the Jar?
I don't.
It's a great
send me a link.
Irish folk song. Yeah.
Nice. Send me a link. It's been great chatting with you. And until next time, we'll see you in the lodge.
See you in the lodge.
Cheers.
Sláinte.